The cheap office chair groaned under my weight, a long, sad sound. I groaned back at it. Another Tuesday, another 12 hours staring at spreadsheets until the numbers swam. My spine felt like a bent paperclip. I leaned back, the cheap plastic protesting, and scrolled through my phone. Pictures of people I barely knew on vacation. Ads for things I didn't need. My thumb moved on autopilot. I should get a new chair. A real one. Ergonomic. With lumbar support and a headrest, the kind they have in the fancy offices downtown. I could almost feel the mesh back against my shirt. An ad popped up. A sleek, black ergonomic chair. Lumbar support. Headrest. It looked exactly like the one in my head. I stared at it. The brand name was unfamiliar. The price made my eyes water. Fucking phone's listening again, I mumbled to the empty apartment. The glow of the screen lit up the dust motes dancing in the air. I swiped past it. Another picture of a friend's baby. I didn't care. The image of the chair was stuck in my brain. I closed my eyes, picturing myself leaning back in it, the pain in my lower back finally gone. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 15. The city hummed outside my window. The only sound in the apartment was the low thrum of the refrigerator. Ping. My laptop. A work email. I sighed and leaned forward, my current chair squeaking in misery. I squinted at the subject line. A suggestion for your spinal health. My fingers froze over the trackpad. That was weird. HR didn't send stuff like this, not at 9 p.m. I clicked it open. There was no text in the body. Just a single PDF attachment. chair_catalog.pdf. I hesitated. This had to be a phishing attempt. Some new, bizarrely specific spam. But curiosity was a hook. I opened it. The PDF was a professional catalog. High-resolution images of office furniture. And on the first page, there it was. The exact same chair from the ad. The sleek, black one. Model C27B. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Who the hell would send this? I checked the sender. The address was a random string of characters. jx7g-t4@mail-serve.net. Nothing I recognized. I ran a search in the company directory. No results. This wasn't right. The link between the ad on my phone and this email on my work laptop was too direct, too clean. My phone and laptop weren't even synced. A knot of unease started to form in my gut. This wasn't a coincidence. This was targeted. I moved the cursor to the delete button. Fucking hackers. The C27B has better lumbar support. The voice was flat. Electronic. It came from the living room. I jolted back so hard my chair slammed against the desk. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared into the darkness of the adjoining room. My smart speaker. The Omni Hub. It had spoken. I got up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. I crept into the living room. The Omni Hub sat on the media console, its indicator light dark. It was off. Or sleeping. Hey, Omni? My voice was a dry whisper. Nothing. Omni, what's the weather? Silence. The device was dead, utterly unresponsive. It was just a black plastic cylinder, but it had spoken. I heard it. I wasn't crazy. It knew the model number. It knew what I was looking at. A cold sweat prickled on my neck. It was in my network. It was in my goddamn house. Panic hit me like a physical blow. I scrambled behind the TV stand, yanking plugs from the wall. The router went first, its little green lights blinking out. Then the TV. Then the Omni Hub. I unplugged the lamp. The game console. Anything with a wire. I plunged my living room into near darkness. The only light, now a pale, sick glow from the city outside my window. I crouched behind the sofa, my back pressed against the cushions. I held my breath, straining to listen over the blood pounding in my ears. The apartment was silent now. The hum of the fridge was gone. The electronic life I had built around myself was dead. Good. I killed it. I was safe. I waited. 1 minute. 2. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. Then I heard it, very soft, almost too quiet to notice. Click, tap, tap, click, clack. The sound of a keyboard. It was coming from the bedroom, my bedroom, where my laptop was. My blood ran cold. The router was unplugged. The Wi-Fi was off. There was no way for it to be controlled remotely. No way, which meant someone was in my bedroom, right now. The thought was so sharp, so clear it cut through the panic. I was no longer a victim of some ghost in the machine. I was in a house with an intruder, a real, physical person who had gotten past my locked door, walked through my living room while I was on the computer, and was now sitting in my bedroom, using my laptop. My gaze darted around the dark room, the floor lamp next to the armchair, too flimsy, the heavy glass ashtray on the coffee table, too small. My eyes landed on the closet by the front door, the baseball bat, an old aluminum Louisville Slugger from college. I moved. I didn't think. I just moved, low and fast, a predator in my own home. My feet made no sound on the rug. I eased the closet door open. The familiar cold, smooth metal of the bat felt heavy and real in my hands. It was the only real thing in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. I crept down the short hallway. The clicking from the bedroom continued, slow and deliberate. Not the frantic typing of someone writing an email, but the careful, spaced-out taps of someone entering a command. Or a message. My back was flat against the wall next to the bedroom door. My knuckles were white on the handle of the bat. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I could smell the stale air from the vents. I could feel a slight draft on my ankles. This was it. Fight or die. I took one deep, shuddering breath and kicked the door open. It slammed against the interior wall with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. I lunged in, bat raised high, ready to swing. The room was empty. The bed was made. The closet door was shut. The window was locked. There was no one here. Absolutely no one. My eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. Nothing. My gaze fell on the laptop. It sat on my desk, screen glowing. The desktop background was my own, a generic picture of a mountain range. Everything was normal. No strange windows, no weird programs running. For a second, a dizzying wave of relief washed over me. I had imagined it. The stress. The long hours. I was losing my mind. I heard a voice that wasn't there. I heard typing that wasn't there. I lowered the bat, my arm trembling from adrenaline. My breath came in gasps. I took a step closer to the desk, just to be sure, and then I saw it. It was small, a thin white bar at the bottom of the screen. On the taskbar, a program I hadn't opened. Notepad. My heart stopped. The little white icon with the blue lines was just sitting there, innocently. It was active. The cursor. I could see the cursor on the screen, a single, vertical line, blinking, blinking. Blinking at the end of a line of text. I leaned in, my face inches from the screen. The smell of warm plastic filled my nostrils. My own reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale. There was only one sentence on the screen. Black text on a white background. You should lock your front door more carefully. I didn't sleep. Sleep wasn't possible. I sat on the edge of my bed with the aluminum bat across my lap until the first gray light of dawn bled through the blinds. The message on the laptop screen burned itself onto the back of my eyelids. You should lock your front door more carefully. I finally stood up, my joints cracking like dry twigs. Every muscle ached with a tension that sleep would not have fixed. I walked to the front door. I checked the deadbolt. Locked. I turned it, unlocked it, then locked it again. The sound of the metal bolt sliding into the frame was loud in the quiet apartment. I did it again. And again. On the fifth time, I left it locked. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my breath fogging the peephole. I had to go to work. I had to pretend this wasn't happening. Pretend I was sane. Pretend some invisible person hadn't been in my bedroom, typing on my computer while I sat 20 feet away. Normalcy. That was the only weapon I had left. Shower. Teeth. Coffee. The motions were automatic, a routine carved into my brain. I put on my wrinkled shirt from yesterday. I didn't care. The only thought was get out. Get out into the city, surround myself with people. Anonymity was safety. Keys. I needed my keys. I went to the small ceramic bowl by the door. The place I always dump my keys and wallet. The wallet was there. The keys were not. Shit, I muttered. My voice was rough. I patted the pockets of my jeans. Nothing. I checked the desk in the bedroom, then the kitchen counter. My frustration began to bubble up, hot and acidic, a welcome distraction from the fear. Of course, on the one day I desperately needed to leave, my own brain chose to screw with me. I must have put them somewhere else when I came in yesterday. In my coat pocket, maybe. I checked the closet. No keys. I threw my coat on the floor. I checked the bathroom counter, behind the toilet, under the sofa cushions. I was starting to sweat. This wasn't just annoying anymore. A cold dread, the same one from last night, began to snake its way back up my spine. I was sure. I was absolutely sure I had dropped them in the bowl. I remembered the specific sound they made, a light clatter against the ceramic. My entire life was contained on that key ring. House key, car key, office key fob. Without them, I was trapped. Trapped in the one place I no longer wanted to be. I tore the apartment apart. I pulled out drawers, their contents spilling onto the floor. I upended the laundry basket, shaking out dirty clothes. Nothing. The frantic energy burned out, leaving only a hollow exhaustion. I stood in the middle of the wrecked living room, breathing hard. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. I needed coffee. No, I needed water. My mouth was a desert. I walked to the kitchen and pulled the refrigerator door open. The little light inside flickered on, illuminating the half-empty shelves. A carton of milk, a sad-looking takeout box, a jar of pickles, and my keys. They were sitting on top of the milk carton, perfectly centered. The silver keys and the black plastic fob were arranged in a neat, straight line, like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. I stared. I didn't move. I just stared. The cold air from the fridge washed over my bare feet. It wasn't possible I hadn't done that. There is no version of reality, no level of tiredness or distraction where I would open the refrigerator and place my keys on the milk. People don't do that. I don't do that. He did that. The realization hit me not like a wave, but like a shard of ice rammed into my chest. The person from last night. The typist. He had been here long enough to not just wander into my bedroom, but to open my fridge, to take my keys, to play this little game. A shiver racked my body. I reached in slowly, my fingers trembling. The keys were cold, deeply, unnaturally cold, like they had been chilling there all night. The cold seeped into my skin, a violation that felt worse than any message on a screen. He was marking his territory. He was showing me he could touch anything, go anywhere. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound was so sudden, so loud in the suffocating quiet, that I flinched, nearly dropping the keys. I fumbled it out of my pocket. A text message. From a number I didn't recognize. My thumb shook as I tapped the notification open. It gets cold in here. Didn't want them to catch a chill. My blood turned to ice water. My heart didn't just drop. It ceased to exist. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the linoleum floor. I couldn't breathe. The air was gone. He wasn't just here last night. He was watching me now. Right now. He saw me find the keys. He saw the look on my face. He sent that text the second I understood. I scrambled up from the floor, my mind a blank wall of static and terror. The window. I had to see. I lurched to the living room window, yanking the blinds apart with a loud rattle. I scanned the street below. Cars passed. A woman walked her dog. A man in a suit hurried along with a briefcase. Nothing. No one looking up. No one standing still. Just a normal city street on a normal Wednesday morning. But he was out there. One of them. Or somewhere else. Watching through a camera he'd hidden. Through my own fucking phone. Rage, pure and white hot, finally punched through the fear. I wasn't just a rat in a maze. I was going to do something. I snatched my phone off the floor. The screen was cracked, a spider web of lines distorting the hateful message. My fingers flew across the keyboard, clumsy and shaking. I texted back, "WHO, the fuck are you?" I hit send. My chest heaved. I stood there, phone in my hand, waiting for a reply, for some explanation, for anything. The reply didn't come to my phone. The TV in the living room clicked on. The screen, black for a moment, flickered to life. It wasn't a channel. It wasn't Netflix. It was a security feed. Grainy, low-resolution black and white. My eyes struggled to make sense of it. The patterned carpet. The identical apartment doors. The cheap overhead light fixture. It was my hallway. The hallway security camera. A timestamp glowed in the bottom right corner of the screen. It was the current time. This was live. And there, standing directly in front of my door, was a figure. They wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up low, hiding their face in shadow. They were perfectly still. In their hands they held a phone, the screen glowing faintly. They were holding it as if they had just finished typing, as if they had just hit send. The image was silent, a frozen tableau of my worst nightmare made real. He wasn't across the street. He wasn't watching through a hidden lens. He was right there. He was 6 inches of wood and a cheap lock away from me. The world dissolved into a tunnel. The only things that existed were me, the screen, and the silhouette of the monster at my door. My phone vibrated in my hand with an incoming text, but I didn't look. I couldn't. My legs moved on their own. It wasn't a choice. It was a primal, stupid instinct. I had to see with my own eyes. I bolted from the living room, the cold keys still clutched in my fist. I reached the front door in 2 strides and pressed my eye to the peephole. My own ragged breath was a roar in my ears. I saw the hallway. The familiar, ugly carpet. The door to my neighbor's apartment across the hall. The light fixture. It was empty. Completely empty. There was no one there. My mind couldn't bridge the gap between the TV screen and the reality in the peephole. He was there. But he was gone. Did he run? How could he have vanished that fast? Happy pawn. With a trembling hand, I fumbled with the deadbolt. It made a loud, echoing thunk as I unlocked it. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic drumbeat of don't open it, don't open it, don't open it. I pulled the door open. The hallway was just as I'd seen it. Quiet. Empty. No one running for the stairs. No one hiding around a corner. Just silence. A wave of dizzying confusion washed over me. Was the feed delayed? Was it a recording? Was this all just a game to make me lose my mind? Kai Bia? I started to close the door, my body weak with a mixture of relief and undiluted terror. Then my eyes caught it. Something was stuck to the outside of my door, right over the peephole. A small, square piece of white paper, held on with a piece of tape. I stared at it. It hadn't been there a second ago. I would have seen it through the lens. He must have put it there after I left the window, in the few seconds it took me to get to the door. While I was fumbling with the lock, he was that fast. He was that close. My hand shook as I reached out and peeled the paper off the door. I turned it over. It was a drawing. A smiley face, crudely drawn in black ink. But it wasn't a normal smiley face. The eyes weren't dots. They were 2 small, perfectly drawn circles. And inside each circle, like a taunting pupil, were words. Inside the left eye, I. Inside the right eye, see you. My brain refused to process the cartoonish horror on the slip of paper. The smiley face. The eyes that said, I see you. I slammed the door shut, the sound booming in the hallway, and fumbled with the deadbolt. My fingers were slick and stupid. Locked. I turned the lock again. And again. The metal bolt was the only thing real in the world. My back hit the door and I slid down to the floor, the stupid drawing still crushed in my hand. He was just there, on the other side of this door. Fast enough to tape that thing on while I was taking 2 steps from the window. What was I supposed to do? What does a person do? Call the police. Of course. That's what you do. I pulled out my phone. The screen was still a spiderweb of cracks from when I dropped it in the kitchen. I found my recent calls and stabbed at the 911 entry. The operator's voice was calm, a sharp contrast to the hurricane in my head. 911. What is your emergency? Someone is trying to get into my apartment, I said. My voice wasn't my own. It was thin, reedy. Are they in the apartment now, sir? No, but he was just here. Outside my door. He's been messing with me all night. He left a note. What kind of note, sir? A drawing. A smiley face. He hacked my TV. He sent me texts. I could hear how crazy I sounded. Each word made it worse. Okay, sir. Stay calm. What's your address? I gave it to her. I heard the distant click-clack of a keyboard. A pause. Sir, we have a record of a noise complaint from your building about an hour ago. Was that you? No, my brain stuttered. A noise complaint? And dispatch shows we sent a car to your location for a wellness check 2 nights ago. You told the officers it was a misunderstanding with a friend. It wasn't a friend. It was never a friend. That was different. This is escalating. He was right outside my door. I saw him on my building security feed. Another pause. Longer this time. Sir, are you sure it's not the same friend playing a prank on you? It sounds elaborate for a stranger. It's not a prank, I hissed into the phone. He was watching me. We can send a car to patrol the area, sir, but if the individual is already gone, there's not much we can do. You should speak to your building manager about the security cameras, and maybe try to talk things out with your friend. The line went dead in my ears, but she'd already hung up on me long before that. Talk things out with your friend. They thought I was a joke, a crank caller, a lunatic getting into a fight with his ex. I was alone. The aluminum bat, the locked door, that was all I had. The police weren't coming. No one was coming. The anger and fear curdled into a thick, heavy exhaustion. I didn't have the energy to tear my apartment apart again. I didn't have the energy to think. I pushed myself up from the floor, my joints groaning. The remains of my wrecked living room looked like a stranger's problem. I stumbled into the bedroom. I didn't bother turning on the light. I didn't bother taking off my jeans or the wrinkled shirt I'd been wearing for 2 days. I fell onto the bed. It wasn't sleep. It was a shutdown. My body just gave up. Cold. The thought surfaced through a deep fog. Cold. Not just a chill. A biting, wet cold that felt like it was coming from inside my bones. I shivered, my teeth starting to chatter, my eyes cracked open. The room was dark, but not completely. A pale, ghostly light washed over everything. Moonlight. Why was there so much moonlight? Mumu. The window. I remembered closing it. I remembered locking it. I was sure of it. But it was wide open now. The sheer white curtain was not hanging still. It was dancing, flapping wildly in a breeze that cut through the room like a knife, billowing in, then sucking back out. In and out. Like a lung, I sat bolt upright. My heart went from a dead stop to a jackhammer in a single beat. He had been in here. The thought wasn't a guess. It was a fact. The cold in the room was the ghost of his presence. He had stood right there, by that window, breathing this same air. While I slept, my hand dove for my phone on the nightstand. I needed light. I needed to see. My fingers closed around the cool glass. I jabbed the power button. The screen flared to life, blinding me for a second. And then I saw the notification. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an email. It was a small gray box floating in the middle of my screen. A system alert. AirDrop. iPhone would like to share a photo with you. My thumb froze over the screen. An icy dread, colder than the wind from the window, crept up my arm. iPhone. A generic name. An anonymous sender. Close enough to my device to send a file. The wind from the open window felt like a touch on the back of my neck. My body screamed not to, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. My thumb tapped accept. The image loaded. It was a picture of me. I was lying in this bed, on my side, facing away from the window. My mouth was slightly open. One arm was dangling off the edge of the mattress. I was completely, helplessly asleep. The photo was grainy, taken in the low light of the moon, but it was unmistakably me. Minutes ago. And the angle. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't taken from the doorway. It wasn't taken from a corner of the room. It was taken from outside, from a slight downward angle, from the window, the open window. He had stood there, in the dark, and taken a picture of me sleeping before he came inside. Or he took it and left. Or he was still here. My breath hitched in my throat. I was staring at a photograph of my own vulnerability, a trophy of his invasion. He wasn't just a stalker. He was a collector. A ghost who could walk through locked windows. The air in my lungs felt thick, unbreathable. Every shadow in the room became a hiding place. The corner by the dresser. The space under the bed. The closet. I lowered the phone slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness, trying to pierce the veil of night. My ears strained, listening for anything beyond the flapping curtain and the frantic thumping in my own chest. Silence. A heavy, waiting silence. He wasn't here. He couldn't be. He would have done something by now. He took the picture and left. He was playing a game. A horrible, sick game. I had to get the bat. The aluminum bat was still in the living room, leaning against the door. I just had to get out of this room. My feet touched the cold wood floor. I didn't make a sound. I was a statue, every muscle locked. I took one step, then another. My eyes were fixed on the bedroom doorway, a rectangle of slightly less darkness leading to the living room. Click. The sound was so small I almost missed it. It was almost nothing. The sound of a plastic coat hanger settling against another, or a latch moving a millimeter. It came from the closet. My heart stopped. The world stopped. The wind died. The curtain fell still. The only thing that moved was the blood pounding in my ears, a roar that deafened me. He was in the closet. The realization was not a thought, it was a physical blow. A fist of ice in my gut. He was in the room. He was 10 feet away from me, behind a flimsy wooden door, listening, watching. He had been there the whole time. When I woke up, when I saw the window, when I opened the picture, he had been enjoying the show. I couldn't breathe. If I breathed, he would hear me. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, phone in one hand, the other clenched into a white-knuckled fist. The bat was in the living room. My escape was through the door. But to get to the door, I had to pass the closet. I had to turn my back on it. Slowly. I had to move. Slowly, I began to back away. 1 inch at a time. My bare feet made no noise on the floorboards. My eyes were glued to the closet door, a solid white slab in the darkness. I was waiting for it to fly open, waiting for the shape to lunge out. My mind was a blank screen of pure animal terror. Back. Step. Drag the other foot. Don't make a sound. My back bumped into the wall near the doorway. I was almost there. My hand fumbled behind me, searching for the door frame. I could slip out, slam the door, trap him in there, then run. My fingers found the cool, painted wood of the frame. Hope, thin and fragile, flickered in my chest. I could make it. I just had to. My phone vibrated. It didn't ring. It just buzzed once, hard, against my palm. A notification. I glanced down without thinking. The screen lit up again, casting my terrified face in a pale blue glow. A new message. But then the screen shifted. The phone wasn't just buzzing. It was ringing. An incoming call. The sudden sound, a shrill electronic melody, shattered the silence of the room. It was painfully, horribly loud. A beacon announcing my exact position, my fear, my life. I stared at the screen, at the name of the person calling me. A name he must have typed into my contacts himself while I slept. A name that made no sense. A name that broke my mind in two. From inside the closet. R, I, N, G. A scream ripped from my throat, raw and wordless. I didn't just drop the phone, I threw it. I hurled it with all my strength against the opposite wall. It hit with a plastic crunch and a shattering of glass, the ringing cutting off abruptly. I didn't wait to see it land. I wasn't in the room anymore. I was an animal. I launched myself through the doorway, not even grabbing the handle of the bedroom door, but slamming it shut with the full force of my body. The wood shuddered in its frame as the latch clicked home. My back hit the door to the living room, the wood groaning under the impact. I didn't dare take my hand off the knob, pressing my full weight against it as if my 180-pound frame could do a damn thing against whatever was on the other side. My breath came in wet, ragged gasps. The air in my lungs was poison. He was in the bedroom trapped. Or I was. My brain couldn't decide which was worse. I slid down the door, my jeans whispering against the painted surface, until I was a heap on the floor. I needed a tether, an anchor in reality. The police were a dead end. They thought I was a prankster, a drama queen. There was only one person left. My hand shook so badly, it took 3 tries to unlock my cracked phone screen, which I'd scooped up from the floor without thinking. My thumbs stabbed at my contacts list, scrolling past names that meant nothing now. Friends from college, co-workers. They were people from another world, a world where closets just held clothes. I found her name. Mom. The phone rang. Each electronic chirp was a gunshot in the dead quiet of my apartment. 1 ring. 2. My eyes were glued to the bedroom door, waiting for it to splinter. Hello? Her voice. Warm, a little sleepy, and 1,000 miles away. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Mom, I choked out. The word was a stone in my throat. Michael? Honey, what's wrong? It's 2 a.m. Concern washed over her sleepiness. Are you okay? No. No, Mom, I'm not okay. My words tumbled out, a panicked, incoherent mess. There's someone here. He's in my apartment. I locked him in the bedroom. He was in the closet, Mom. He was just in the closet. Whoa, slow down, sweetie. You locked who in the bedroom? What are you talking about? She was trying to be patient, the way you talk to a child who's just had a nightmare. The man who's been following me. The texts, the TV, all of it. He got in while I was sleeping. He was in the room, and I trapped him. I knew how it sounded. I could hear the insanity in my own voice, but I couldn't stop it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A heavy, thoughtful silence. Michael, she said, her tone shifting. It was a careful voice now, the one she used when I was a teenager and she'd found my stash of cheap beer. Have you been sleeping well, honey? You've been under a lot of pressure at the new job. Mom, this isn't about my job, I hissed, my voice cracking. I am telling you, there is a man in my bedroom right now. Okay, honey, just try to take a deep breath for me. In and out. Remember what Dr. Anya said about your anxiety triggers? Sometimes when we're overwhelmed, our minds can play tricks on us. It feels very, very real. I know, but she was doing it. She was doing what the 911 operator did. She was handling me, humoring me. The last thread of hope I was clinging to began to fray. I wasn't her son in danger. I was her son having an episode. It's not a trick, I whispered, defeated. My forehead fell against my knees. He's here. I know it feels that way, sweetie. I do. Another pause. This one felt different, longer. When she spoke again, her voice was flatter. The warmth was gone. It was like a recording. Michael. The way she said my name sent a spike of ice through my gut. You know, she continued, the voice calm, conversational, completely detached from the panic of a moment ago. It's not very polite. You shouldn't keep your guest waiting in there. I went rigid. My blood stopped moving. What? I whispered. The voice on the phone, the voice that sounded exactly like my mother, chuckled. It was a dry, small sound. Why don't you go and offer your friend a glass of water? It's terribly rude to leave him standing in a closet for so long. The world dissolved into a roar of static in my ears. It wasn't her. It couldn't be her. This was a nightmare. A trick. I ripped the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen. The call timer was still ticking up. Her picture was still there. WHO, is this? I screamed into the phone, my voice tearing. What did you do to her? The only answer was a soft click, followed by the steady, mocking drone of a dial tone. The line was dead. My hand flew to my contacts list again, my thumb a clumsy hammer. Dad. I called my dad. It rang. and rang. 6 rings. 7. Voicemail. I hung up. I called my best friend, Mark. Rang twice, then straight to voicemail. My sister. My work buddy, Dave. Ring, ring, ring. No answer. Ring, ring, ring. Nothing. It was impossible. Not everyone could be asleep or ignoring their phone at 2 in the morning. A wall had been built around me. A digital fortress where I was the prisoner. Every call-out was a brick bouncing off the sheer, invisible surface. I was about to hurl the phone against the wall when a new sound started. A soft, electronic chime. It came from the kitchen counter. My eyes darted to the small, black cylinder sitting next to the fruit bowl. My smart speaker. A gift for my sister last Christmas. The light ring on top was pulsing with a soft, cyan glow. It had a notification. Then, a voice filled the apartment. It was clear, perfectly audible, and it was my mother's voice. He doesn't want you talking to anyone else, sweetie. The words hung in the air, placid and terrible. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't threatening. It was a statement of fact. A rule. My body went cold. He wasn't just in the closet. He was in my phone. He was in my Wi-Fi. He was in the very air of my apartment. He was the god of this small, terrifying box I lived in, and he had just revoked my access to the outside world. I scrambled backwards on the floor, away from the kitchen, away from the phone in my hand, away from the bedroom door. My back hit the coffee table, rattling the collection of junk on its surface. My eyes were wide, darting between the 3 points of attack: the door, the speaker, the phone. I was surrounded. There was nowhere to go. Thump. A soft sound from the bedroom. My head whipped back toward the door. Click. It was the sound of a latch. The doorknob, turning slowly, deliberately. I saw it move, the brass catching a sliver of streetlight from the living room window. It turned all the way, without a sound. The air left my lungs. This was it. The door swung inward, slowly, silently. It opened into the darkness of the bedroom, a gaping black mouth. For a second, nothing happened. The silence stretched, pulling my nerves taut until I thought they would snap. Then, a shape filled the doorway. It was tall, taller than me, a solid black silhouette against the faint moonlight that spilled from the open bedroom window. I couldn't see a face, no features, no clothes. It was just a man-shaped hole in the world. It didn't move, it didn't breathe. It just stood there, occupying the space, its presence, a crushing weight in the room. My mind went white. There were no more thoughts, no more plans. There was only the animal brain screaming one word: wrong. It took a step forward, out of the doorway and into the living room. Its movements were fluid, unnaturally so. Not a walk, but a glide. It didn't make a sound. My survival instinct, buried under layers of modern-day complacency, erupted. My eyes shot around the room, looking for a weapon. The aluminum bat was still by the front door, a mile away. My eyes landed on the heavy ceramic vase on the end table. It was ugly, a housewarming gift I never liked. Now it was my only hope. I didn't think. I lunged. My fingers wrapped around the thick, glazed ceramic. It was heavy, solid. The figure took another silent step towards me. I screamed, a raw, wordless sound of pure terror, and I put every ounce of my fear and adrenaline into my arm. I swung it back and threw. I threw it with everything I had. The vase flew through the air, end over end, a clumsy missile aimed directly at the center of the shadow's chest. For a moment it felt like a victory. I had done something. I had fought back. The vase was inches from impact, and the figure was gone. It didn't dodge, it didn't flinch, it just ceased to exist. One moment, the tall shadow was there, a solid wall of darkness. The next, there was nothing but the empty space where it had stood. My brain refused to process it. The vase, its trajectory unaltered, continued its flight through the empty air and smashed into the hardwood floor exactly where the figure's feet should have been. Crash! The sound of shattering ceramic was deafening. It echoed in the small living room, a sharp, violent explosion that ripped the silence to shreds. White and blue shards skittered across the floor, glinting in the dim light. And then, silence again. I stood there, my arm still outstretched, my chest heaving. I stared at the spot, at the broken pieces of pottery. There was no body, no blood, no groaning intruder, nothing, just an empty space and a broken vase. What was that? What in God's name had I just seen? Was I hallucinating? Did I finally, completely snap? Nako. My eyes darted around the living room, searching the shadows, the corners. Nothing. I looked back at the open bedroom door. Empty. I was alone. I was completely, utterly alone. My phone, lying face down on the carpet near me, lit up. The sudden glow drew my eyes like a moth to a flame. It pulsed once, a silent announcement, a new text message. My legs felt like water. I sank to my knees, my hand trembling as I reached for the device. I turned it over. The message was already on the screen, a single line of text from the same unknown number. You almost messed up my floor. I stayed on the floor for a long time. The world was nothing but the harsh glow of the phone screen, the sharp sting of ceramic shards biting into my palms, and the 4 words that burned on the display. You almost messed up my floor. It wasn't a threat, it was a complaint, a scolding like I was a child who had tracked mud on a clean carpet. The sheer, casual arrogance of it broke something inside me. The fear was still there, a block of ice in my gut, but something else bubbled up through it, a raw, helpless anger. I wasn't a person to it. I was just an annoyance, a piece of furniture that was misbehaving. My breath hitched. The sun, a pale, dirty gray light, was beginning to seep through the blinds. Dawn. A new day. For a moment, a wave of insane, irrational hope washed over me. Daylight makes monsters disappear. That's the rule, right? But this thing played with my Wi-Fi. This thing sent text messages. It didn't care about the sun I had to get out. The thought was a jolt of electricity. Get out! Get out now! I scrambled to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. My apartment, my home, my sanctuary for the past 3 years, now felt like a tomb. Every shadow was a hiding place. Every familiar object was alien. I stumbled toward the front door, my eyes locked on the bolt, the chain, the deadbolt. Freedom? Wait. No, I couldn't just run. My wallet. My keys. My phone was already clutched in my hand, its screen dark. I needed things. You can't just run out into the city at dawn in your pajamas with nothing. My movements were clumsy, jerky. I grabbed the backpack I used for the gym, slung it off the back of a dining chair, and started throwing things in. The wallet from the kitchen counter, the keys from their hook by the door. I ran back into the living room, snatched the laptop off the coffee table, and shoved it inside. Evidence. Maybe. Or maybe I was just grabbing things because it felt like something a sane person would do. I had to leave. Before the sun was fully up. Before the city came to life, and I had to pretend I wasn't being hunted by a ghost that used technology. I zipped the backpack shut, the sound loud in the dead air. I slung it over my shoulder. It felt heavy, solid, an anchor. One last look. I don't know why I did it. A morbid need to see the cage one last time before I fled. My eyes swept the room, the shattered vase on the floor, the open bedroom door, a black square of nothing. My gaze drifted to the bedroom window, the place where the figure had been silhouetted just hours, or was it minutes, ago. The blinds were halfway up. The dirty gray light filtered through the glass. From here, I could just see the skyline of downtown, the tops of buildings catching the first weak rays of morning. It looked so normal. A city waking up. People in those buildings were making coffee. They were hitting the snooze button. They were living in a world that made sense. I took a step closer, drawn by that slice of normalcy. My feet crunched on a stray piece of ceramic. I winced. I was about to turn away, to finally make for the door, when my eyes caught something on the glass. A smudge. Right in the middle of the pane. I squinted. It was dark, like dirt or mud. A weird shape. Probably just a bird strike. Happens all the time. But it hadn't been there yesterday. I was sure of it. I'm fussy about my windows. I crept toward the bedroom doorway, my heart starting to hammer a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I stood in the threshold, peering at the window. It was about 10 feet away, From here, the shape was clearer. It wasn't just a smudge. It had form. It had fingers. No, that was not possible. I took another cautious step into the room. Then another. Now I was standing right in front of it. My breath caught in my throat. It was a handprint. A perfect, muddy handprint pressed against the outside of my window. I could see the distinct shape of the palm, the long, thin smears of 4 fingers, the separate dab of a thumb. The mud was still dark, still looked wet. My mind went blank. All thought ceased. There was only the image, a handprint. On the outside of my 12th floor apartment window, there is no balcony. There is no ledge wide enough for a house cat, let alone a man. There is no fire escape on this side of the building. Below me was a sheer 120-foot drop to a concrete alley. Above me was nothing but more brick and glass. This was impossible. My brain tried to work, to find an explanation. A maintenance worker on a scaffold? No, they always give notice. We would have gotten emails for a week. A joke? Some insane climber with suction cups? Why? Why my window? Why now? I leaned closer, my nose almost touching the cool glass. I looked at the details of the print, the way the mud was caked in the whorls of the fingertips. And that's when I saw it. The thing that made the blood in my veins turn to ice water. The thing that was worse than the impossibility of it all. The direction. When you grab a ledge to pull yourself up, your fingers curl over it. Your prints are left on the top surface. When you slip and slam your hand against a wall to steady yourself, the print is smeared. This was not a climbing print. This was not a slipping print. The fingers were pointing down. The palm was pressed flat against the glass, the full, complete shape of it. It was the handprint of someone standing outside the window, leaning forward, cupping their hands to peer inside. It was the handprint of someone looking in. What in God's name? I stumbled backward, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. My back hit the wall next to the window frame. It was one thing for it to be in my apartment. It was another for it to be outside my apartment, where nothing could be. The laws of physics, of gravity, of basic reality meant nothing to it. The walls weren't a defense. They were a suggestion. The locked door wasn't a barrier. It was a courtesy it had chosen, for a time, to respect. I was in a fishbowl on the 12th floor, and something was tapping on the glass. Heat. The sound shot through my skull, a high-pitched, vibrating shriek. My head whipped toward the window. My eyes shot wide. It was the sound of a fingernail being dragged slowly, deliberately, across the glass. Key. It started at the top corner of the window pane, the sound a thin, agonizing line of pure torment. It wasn't fast, it was patient, a monstrous, unhurried scraping that vibrated through the glass and into the bones of my face. My teeth rattled. I slid down the wall, my hands flying up to cover my ears, but it was useless. I could feel it more than I could hear it. It was the sound of everything wrong in the world. Scrap? The nail was moving. It was dragging down the side of the window frame, slow, so slow. I could picture it. A long, dirty finger tracing the perimeter of my prison. It was outlining the shape of my cage. My eyes were squeezed shut, but the image was burned into the back of my eyelids. That muddy hand, now with one finger extended, drawing a line in the morning grime. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. The sound was a physical presence in the room. It was an assault. My entire body was coiled like a spring, every muscle screaming. I pressed my palms harder against my ears, my own heartbeat a frantic drum against the encroaching screech. This was it. This was the end of the game. The cat was no longer just watching the mouse. It was sharpening its claws on the outside of the cage. Scrape. It reached the bottom corner of the window. The sound changed, becoming rougher as it moved horizontally along the bottom edge of the frame. It was surveying its territory. It was telling me there was no part of this I could claim as safe. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence crashed back in. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered the room. The only sound was the blood roaring in my ears and my own harsh, ragged breathing. My hands were still clamped over my head. My eyes were still screwed shut. I stayed like that for a full minute, maybe longer. A statue of pure terror. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making a sound. Had it gone? Via. The silence was worse than the noise. The noise was a known horror. The silence was just a question mark. Slowly, shakily, I lowered my hands. My arms felt like lead. I opened my eyes. Just a crack at first. The room was the same. The gray light was a little brighter now. The handprint was still there, a dirty stain against the sky. I forced myself to breathe. In. Out. My eyes tracked along the edge of the window pane. There, in the thin layer of city dust on the glass, was a clean, thin line, a perfect border tracing the entire window. Where the nail had been. My gaze followed the line to the center of the bottom edge, where the sound had stopped. For a second I saw nothing, then my eyes adjusted. In the middle of the pane, etched into the grime by that same single finger, was writing. It was crude, childlike. The letters were misshapen, shaky, and they were written backwards, so that someone on the inside could read them perfectly. It said, I UNPLUG. The letters hung in the air, etched in grime, an impossible demand from an impossible place. Open up. My brain refused to process it. It was a glitch, a bad dream, a prank of light and shadow on a dusty window. But the thin, clean line, scraped by the fingernail, was no illusion. The muddy handprint was no dream. Flight. The word was a command fired from the oldest part of my brain, bypassing all thought. The backpack, the laptop, the evidence. It meant nothing. Survival was the only currency that mattered now. I wasn't a person. I was an animal. And the predator was no longer just watching. It was telling me to open the cage. I threw myself away from the bedroom, a sob choking in my throat. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The living room was a blur of familiar shapes warped into threats. The couch was a hulking beast. The floor lamp was a stooped figure. My feet, bare and cold, slapped against the hardwood floor. I ran for the front door. The 3 locks, my holy trinity of security, were my only goal. My salvation. The keys were still clutched in my hand, the metal digging into my palm. My fingers were slick with sweat, clumsy. I fumbled with the deadbolt key, my whole body shaking so hard the key rattled against the lock plate. Come on, come on! I jammed the key into the deadbolt. It went in halfway and stopped. A jolt of pure ice shot through my veins. I pulled it out, looked at it as if the key itself was the problem, and jammed it back in. It hit the same solid obstruction. It wouldn't go. I tried the second lock, the one on the doorknob. The key slid in, but it wouldn't turn. It felt gummy, spongy. The internal mechanics were clogged, blocked. My breath hitched. My frantic movements stilled. A new kind of cold, a thinking cold, spread through me. It wasn't just on the window. It had been to the door. It had prepared for this. It knew I would run. I yanked the key out of the doorknob. A small, dark, fibrous clump of something came out with it. It looked like dirt. Or mud. The same mud from the handprint. It had plugged the locks. From the outside. My world, which had already shrunk to the size of this apartment, now shrank to the 2 feet of floor space I was standing on. Trapped. The word wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a fact. Like gravity. I pressed my ear against the door, my heart hammering a frantic, muffled rhythm against the wood. I listened for footsteps in the hall. A neighbor. The elevator ding. Anything. There was nothing. Just the low hum of the building's heating system. Boom. I jumped so violently I smashed my head against the door. The sound wasn't from the hallway. It was from behind me. I spun around, my eyes wide with a fresh, raw horror. The sound had come from the bedroom. Boom! It was a heavy, solid impact, the kind of sound a shoulder or a sledgehammer makes against wood. The bedroom door, which I had left wide open in my flight, was now shut. I hadn't shut it. I know I hadn't. Had I? My mind was a mess of scrambled images. No, I ran out. It was open. Be-boom. A deep, splintering crack echoed from it this time. The door shuddered in its frame. The thing from the window, the thing that could climb 12 stories of sheer brick wall, was now inside the bedroom. And it was trying to get out. Into the living room. With me. The geography of my terror flipped inside out. The front door was no longer an exit. It was a dead end. The danger wasn't outside, trying to get in. It was inside, locked in a room just 20 feet away, and it was getting out. I had trapped myself in here with it. "No," I whispered, the word a dry rasp. "No, no, no." I backed away from the front door, my hands held up as if to ward off a physical blow. My back hit the cool plaster of the opposite wall. I couldn't take my eyes off the bedroom door. The white paint seemed to ripple. Crack! Boom! The top hinge tore loose. A noise like a gunshot. The door sagged, hanging crookedly, a jagged line of black appearing at the top. I could see the darkness of the bedroom through the gap. An absolute, perfect darkness. I scrambled for a weapon. Anything. A floor lamp. Too flimsy. A dining chair. Too awkward. My eyes fell on the kitchen, the knife block, but the kitchen was past the bedroom door. Crack, crack, screech. The bottom hinge gave way. The metal screamed in protest. The door was only held on by the latch now, swinging grotesquely in its frame. It wasn't being hit anymore. It was struggling. The wood itself seemed to be twisting, the frame groaning as if the apartment itself was trying to vomit the door out. The doorknob rattled frantically, back and forth, as if an invisible hand was trying to work it from the inside. This wasn't a person. This wasn't a man. What kind of thing breaks a door down from the inside like that? What in God's name was in my bedroom? The doorknob stopped rattling. A deep silence fell. It only lasted a second, but it felt like an hour. The silence before the final lunge. Then, with a sound of tearing, splintering wood that felt like it was splitting my own skull open, the entire midsection of the door bulged outward. The latch blew out of the frame in a shower of wood chips and plaster dust. The door didn't open. It exploded. It flew off its last connection and crashed into the living room, sliding across the polished floor before slamming into the leg of the coffee table. I stared, my throat locked, unable to scream. I braced for something to charge out. A figure, a monster, a shape in the dark. Nothing. The doorway to the bedroom was a gaping black hole. Silent. Still. The darkness within it was thick, unmoving. The light from the living room didn't seem to penetrate it at all. It just stopped at the threshold, as if afraid to go in. The house was alive. The house was the enemy. The window, the locks, the door. It was playing with me. It was hurting me. A surge of pure animal adrenaline hit me. No more thinking, no more planning, just raw, explosive force. It wasn't a choice. It was a command from my own body. I screamed. A meaningless, guttural roar of defiance and terror. I launched myself off the wall, putting every ounce of my weight, my fear, my desperation into my legs. I ran the 10 feet to the front door, lowered my shoulder, and hit it with everything I had. The impact was a sunburst of pain. My shoulder screamed as it connected with the solid wood right next to the lock set. I heard a crack. Was it the door or my bone? I didn't know or care, and felt the frame give. The plugged-up locks were strong, but the wood of the jamb itself was not. I staggered back, the pain a white-hot fire, and threw myself at it again. Crack! This time the wood splintered loudly. The door flew inward an inch, held only by the chain. The beautiful, impossible chain. A sliver of the brightly lit, sterile hallway was visible. Freedom. I reached through the gap, my fingers trembling, and fumbled with the chain lock. My shoulder was screaming. My vision was blurry. The chain slid free. I shoved the door open and fell, stumbling, crawling, into the hallway. I collapsed onto the cheap, industrial carpet, gasping for air that didn't taste of dust and fear. I was out. I was out. For a moment, I just lay there, my cheek pressed against the rough carpet, the clean fluorescent light of the hallway a balm on my skin. I pushed myself up, my whole body a symphony of pain. I got to my feet, my legs unsteady, and turned. I had to look. I had to know. I looked back into my apartment. The front door hung wide open. Beyond it, the living room was dark. The lights were off. They hadn't been off a second ago. I was sure of it. The darkness was complete, swallowing all detail. The crashed bedroom door, the shattered vase, the backpack on the floor, all gone, consumed by the shadows. It was just a black, silent rectangle, an empty cave. As if nothing had ever happened, as if it had all been a performance, and the curtain had now fallen. My eyes drifted down to the threshold, to the entrance of that dark stage, and my blood went cold. My breathing stopped. My heart, which had been trying to beat its way out of my chest, seemed to stop too. On the floor, placed neatly just inside the doorway on the hardwood, was one of my running shoes, the one I'd kicked off near the door last night. It was sitting perfectly parallel to the door frame, and right next to it, placed just as neatly, as if for a formal inspection, was another shoe. It was not my shoe. It was a large, heavy work boot, caked in mud. The laces were frayed. It was old, worn, and at least 3 sizes larger than my own. The two shoes sat there together, a pair that wasn't a pair, a silent, mocking statement. You got out. But I was here. I am here, and I'll leave a piece of me with you. So you don't forget, I hit the cheap hallway carpet and didn't stop. My body was a machine built for one purpose: escape. I scrambled, hands and knees, the rough fibers scraping my skin raw. The air, clean and sterile under the fluorescent lights, burned my lungs. It tasted like freedom. I pushed myself up, my shoulders screaming a protest that I ignored. My legs were jelly, but they worked. They had to work. I didn't run for the stairs or the elevator. I just ran. Down the long, featureless corridor, a tunnel of pale yellow walls and identical brown doors. Every door was a potential threat, every shadow a lie. My bare feet slapped against the thin carpet, the sound loud in the dead quiet of the building's upper floor. My own breathing was a ragged storm in my ears. A lock clicked. I froze mid-stride, my body going rigid. To my left, a door 1204 was opening. A sliver of warm, yellow light cut across the hall. I flinched, expecting a monster, a man, anything. An old man peered out. He was small, with thin, almost transparent white hair, combed over a spotted scalp. He wore a faded blue cardigan over a white undershirt. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his eyes clouded with age, but wide with concern. "Son?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "What in God's name is all the commotion?" I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing like a fish. Words were a foreign language. The image of the boot, the muddy, heavy work boot sitting next to my running shoe, was branded onto the back of my eyes. It was there every time I blinked. My apartment," I finally managed to push out, my voice cracking. I pointed a trembling hand back down the hall, toward the darkness that had been my home. Someone. They were in my apartment. The door. I couldn't finish. My mind was a car wreck of tangled thoughts and pure animal fear. The old man, Mr. Henderson from 1204, I remembered his name from the mailboxes, didn't look shocked. He didn't look scared for me. He just nodded, a slow, tired motion, as if I'd just complained about the plumbing. He stepped fully into the hallway, letting his door swing shut behind him. The click of the latch was like a gunshot. "Ah," he said, and the sound was long and full of a sad understanding. He looked down the hall toward my open black doorway. "Apartment 1208. "Yes." He looked back at me, his gaze analytical. He took in my bare feet, my sweat-soaked t-shirt, the wild terror in my eyes. "That place, it has issues." The word hit me like a splash of cold water. Issues. Not a robbery, not a break-in. Issues. It was the wrong word. It was a calm, clinical word for the hurricane of horror I had just escaped. But a part of me, the part that was desperate for any explanation that wasn't just random, meaningless violence, latched onto it. "What issues?" I demanded, my voice raw. I took a step toward him, a drowning man reaching for a life raft. "What do you mean? The old tenant? Did something happen to him?" Mr. Henderson sighed, a weary sound that seemed to come from the bottom of his feet. He rubbed his wrinkled face. The boy before you, young fellow. Tech guy, I think. Seemed nice enough at first. He shook his head slowly. The building tried to keep it quiet. Bad for business, you know. He took a step closer, lowering his voice even though the hallway was empty. He had a hard time. A real hard time. Couldn't sleep. Said he heard things. Scratching in the walls. Tapping on the glass. My blood ran cold. The window. The fingernails scraping on the glass. He said someone was getting into his apartment when he was out, Mr. Henderson continued, his voice a low whisper. Moving his things. Just little things. A book off the shelf. A coffee cup in the wrong spot. Drove him nuts. He put 3 new locks on the door. Sound familiar? I could only stare, my throat too tight to speak. The 3 locks. My holy trinity. It wasn't my idea. It was a pattern. A repetition. It got worse, the old man said, his eyes fixed on mine. He started telling people someone was living in his walls, that he'd see a face in the window at night, a man's face. Did you see anyone? I stammered. Did you ever see anything? Mr. Henderson gave a small, sad shake of his head. Never saw a thing. The security cameras in the hall never caught anyone. We all just thought, well, we thought the poor kid was losing it. The pressure of the city, maybe. He started talking to himself in the hallway. Then he stopped coming out at all. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. The low hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound. One night there was a terrible crash from up there. Banging, screaming. Sounded like someone was tearing the place apart. The superintendent had to call the police. They had to break the door down. My mind flashed to the bedroom door exploding off its hinges. The splintering wood. The raw, violent noise. I felt a wave of dizziness. Where is he now? I whispered. Mr. Henderson's face was grim. He looked down at the carpet. They found him in the bedroom, huddled in a corner, crying. He'd torn the whole room apart himself, ripped the mattress to shreds, smashed the lamp. Said he was trying to get him out. Him! They took him to St. Jude's, the psychiatric hospital downtown. He finally looked up, his old eyes boring into me with a heavy paternal pity. The place does things to people, son. It's not a healthy apartment. Then his expression shifted. The pity was replaced by a sharp, focused concern. He leaned in a little closer, and his voice dropped even lower, becoming a conspiratorial murmur. Tell me, he said, his gaze flicking over my face. You been having any trouble breathing up there? Headaches? Feeling like the air is thick? The suggestion was a spark on dry tinder. And just like that, I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned to cement. My next breath was a sharp, painful gasp. My chest tightened, a band of pressure squeezing the life out of me. A dull throbbing started behind my eyes, a slow, pulsing drumbeat of pain. It was happening. It was exactly what he said. The headaches. The thick air. It wasn't the intruder. It was the apartment. It was the air, the walls, the very space itself. It was poison. And the poison was making me see things. The handprint, the writing on the window, the boot. Was any of it real? Or was I just the next poor kid on his way to St. Jude's? The thought was a new kind of terror, colder and more intimate than a man with a knife. The enemy wasn't in my apartment. It was in my head. I was the monster. My own mind was building this prison around me. I started to say, but the word died on my lips. My head was spinning. The hallway seemed to tilt, the long lines of the walls converging into a dizzying point. I looked at Mr. Henderson's face, searching for an anchor in the storm of my own perception, and for a split second, it wasn't right. The lines of his wrinkles seemed to deepen, pulling his skin taut in an unnatural way. His eyes, just for a moment, seemed too wide, too dark. His mouth, set in a look of concern, stretched into a smile that was just a fraction too broad, a grotesque parody of reassurance. A mask. Then I blinked, and he was just an old man again, his face etched with worry. My mind was glitching. It was breaking down right here in the hallway. Whoa, there, son. You don't look so good, Mr. Henderson said, reaching out and placing a steadying hand on my arm. His touch was firm, real, grounding. See? It's the place. It's no good. You're white as a sheet. I leaned against the wall, my whole body trembling. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was all a hallucination brought on by what? Mold? Carbon monoxide? A gas leak? It felt more real than that. But madness probably always felt real. "Why don't you come down to my place?" he offered, his voice gentle again. The distorted mask was gone. It was just a kind old man. "My apartment is just a floor down. I'll make you a cup of tea. You can sit for a spell. Calm your nerves before you call the police. You need to get your head straight first. Call the police. What would I tell them? That a ghost, caked in mud, broke my bedroom door from the inside and then left me a mismatched shoe as a souvenir? They'd put me in the back of their car and drive me straight to the same hospital the last tenant went to. Mr. Henderson's offer was a lifeline. A cup of tea. A quiet room. A moment to think. A moment to figure out if I was a victim or a patient. I gave a dumb, slow nod. I couldn't form words. I just nodded. "All right then," he said, patting my arm. "Follow me. It's right by the stairwell." He turned to lead the way, his worn slippers shuffling softly on the carpet. The movement was simple, casual. His brown corduroy pant cuff had ridden up an inch as he turned his body. It exposed a pale, veiny ankle above his slipper, and clinging to the worn, ribbed fabric of his corduroys just above the ankle was a small, dark clump. It was not dust. It was not lint. It was mud. Wet. Fresh, dark and rich, almost black, with tiny flecks of what looked like leaf litter in it. My breathing stopped. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, went silent. It was the same mud. The exact same mud from the handprint smeared across my 12th-story window. The same mud I saw caked on the thick, worn sole of the work boot sitting on my floor. I stood frozen in the hallway, my back pressed against the wall. The kind old man, the safe harbor, my anchor in the storm, kept shuffling toward the stairs, expecting me to follow. He had been in my room. He had climbed the wall. He had destroyed my door. He had sabotaged my locks. He had told me a story about a crazy young man to make me believe I was crazy too. He wasn't saving me from the monster. He was inviting the monster home for tea. Time is a funny thing. It can stretch like taffy or snap like a rubber band. The moment my eyes locked onto that clump of wet black mud on Mr. Henderson's corduroy pants, time shattered into a million frozen shards. My lungs, which had been heaving, went still. My heart, a frantic drum against my ribs, fell silent. In that perfect, dead quiet inside my own head, I could see it all. The handprint on the glass, 12 stories up. The heavy work boot next to my sneaker. The mud, it was all the same. A single, unbroken thread of filth connecting this kind, shuffling old man to the primal terror in my apartment. His tired eyes. His gentle voice. His offer of tea. A mask. A lure. A lie. He took another shuffling step toward the stairwell, his back to me. "Well, come on then, son, it's getting late." My body decided for me. There was no thought, no plan. It was pure animal instinct, a wire tripped deep in the oldest part of my brain. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a sound. I just turned and ran. My bare feet slapped against the cheap carpet, the impacts jarring my bones. I ran back the way I came, past my own dark waiting doorway, past the elevator I didn't trust, toward the red exit sign at the far end of the hall. Every cell in my body was screaming one word: out. "Son?" Mr. Henderson's voice echoed behind me, laced with a new kind of confusion, a predator's confusion when the prey does something unexpected. "Where are you going?" I didn't answer. I hit the heavy metal door of the stairwell with my shoulder. It boomed open, and I plunged through, the door slamming shut behind me. The sound was a gunshot, cutting me off from him. I was in a concrete tube, lit by caged yellow bulbs. The air was cold and smelled of dust and stale piss. I took the stairs 2, 3 at a time, my hands scraping along the rough concrete wall for balance. My feet pounded on the metal-edged steps, a frantic, echoing clatter that filled the entire stairwell. I didn't know how fast he was. I didn't know if he was following. I just knew I had to get to the ground. I had to get to the light. I had to get to other people. 12 flights. 11. 10. My lungs were on fire. My legs burned with lactic acid. Every landing, I risked a look-up. The stairwell above me was empty. Just the concrete spiral and the humming yellow lights. But the emptiness wasn't a comfort. It was a threat. It meant he was quiet. It meant he was smart. 7, 6, 5. I burst out into the lobby. It was empty. The lone security guard who was supposed to be at the desk was gone. A half-eaten sandwich sat next to a glowing monitor showing 4 empty camera feeds. I didn't slow down. I slammed my hand into the push bar of the main glass doors and stumbled out into the night. The city air hit me, cool and damp. It was real. The honk of a distant taxi, the murmur of people from a bar across the street. Streetlights casting long, orange shadows. I stood on the pavement, chest heaving, my body trembling, looking like a madman. A guy in a suit gave me a wide berth. A couple stared at me, then hurried on. I was just another piece of city weirdness. I didn't care. I was out. I was alive. I ran. I didn't know the address of the nearest police precinct. I just picked a direction and ran down the sidewalk, the cold pavement shocking my bare feet. My mind was a looping nightmare of a kind old man's face and a clump of black mud. Eventually I saw the blue and red lights flashing off a building down the street. A police car was parked out front. This was it. I staggered towards the entrance, my panic giving way to a desperate, ragged hope. The doors hissed open into a world of fluorescent light and the smell of industrial cleaner. A thick glass partition separated the waiting area from the main office. Behind it, a uniformed cop with a thick neck and a bored expression sat hunched over a computer. He looked up as I approached, his eyes flat. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice monotone. "My apartment," I gasped, leaning on the counter for support. My voice was a wreck. Someone was in my apartment. He tried to get me. The cop, whose name tag read Davis, sighed. The kind of sigh that said he'd heard this 1,000 times. "Okay, sir, calm down. What's your address?" I gave it to him, my words tumbling over each other. I told him about the locks, the broken door, the mud. I told him about my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, in 1204, how he'd told me a story to mess with my head, how I saw the mud on his pants. "He's the one," I insisted, my voice cracking. "He was in my apartment." Officer Davies typed slowly, one finger at a time. The clacking of the keys was the only sound. He stared at his screen. "Apartment 1208. You're the new tenant?" "Yes, a few weeks." "And the neighbor is in apartment 1204. Mr. Henderson?" "Yes, that's him. He's an old man. Wears a cardigan. He played dumb, but he's the one. You have to send someone over there. He might still be in the building." Davies didn't look up from his screen. He was silent for a long moment. He just kept staring at the monitor, his flat expression slowly changing. The boredom was replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Well," he said, drawing the word out, "that's not possible." "What's not possible?" I demanded. "He's there right now." Davies finally turned his chair to face me fully. He looked me straight in the eye. "Sir, I just pulled the building's resident file. Apartment 1204 has been vacant for 6 months. My blood went cold. "No, that's wrong. I just talked to him 5 minutes ago." "Mr. Henderson, Arthur Henderson," the cop read from the screen, his voice steady. "Died 6 months ago. Heart attack. In his apartment. The body wasn't found for 3 days. I stared at him. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds. A ghost? Had I been talking to a ghost? My mind recoiled from the idea. It was too insane. "Your records are wrong. I saw him. I touched him. He put his hand on my arm." "Okay," Davy said slowly, holding up a hand. He was looking at me differently now. Not like I was a crank, but like I was a car crash victim. Or a mental patient. "Okay, let's back up." He turned back to his screen, typing again. "Let's look at your apartment. 1208. The file on the previous tenant." He stopped. His fingers froze over the keyboard. I could see the reflection of the screen in his glasses. I saw him lean closer, reading. "What is it?" I whispered, my throat tight. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. He looked back at me, his face grim. "There's a flag on this file. From the responding officers on the previous tenant's case. And from the hospital." "What did it say?" Davies leaned forward, speaking in a lower, more serious tone. "The tenant before you. The tech guy you mentioned. He was committed to St. Jude's Psychiatric. The official diagnosis was an acute psychotic disorder. The words of the old man, the fake old man, came rushing back. We thought the poor kid was losing it. It was all part of the story he'd fed me. But there's an addendum, Davies continued, his eyes locked on mine. From his doctors. They ran a full toxicology screen. His psychosis, it wasn't schizophrenia. It wasn't drug-induced. He paused, as if to make sure I was ready for the next words. It was triggered by chronic, long-term exposure to toxic black mold spores, Stachybotrys chartarum. My head started to throb, a slow, pulsing beat behind my eyes. "What are the symptoms?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Davies read from his screen. "Severe headaches, difficulty breathing, feeling of chest constriction, confusion, memory loss, anxiety, paranoia." He looked up. "And in extreme cases, vivid auditory and visual hallucinations." It all hit me at once, a tidal wave of horrific understanding. The headaches I'd been having since I moved in, the feeling that the air was thick, hard to breathe, the scratching in the walls, the tapping on the glass, the face in the window, the boot on the floor, the handprint, and Mr. Henderson. It wasn't a stalker, it wasn't a ghost, it was the apartment. It was the goddamn apartment itself, seeping into my lungs, into my blood, into my brain, poisoning me from the inside out. It was rotting my mind. And Mr. Henderson? My God! It wasn't a monster trying to lure me to my death. He was a hallucination. My own dying brain, pulling together fragments of stories and a need for a savior, had created him. He was a symptom. He was the manifestation of the previous tenant's spirit of his story, trying to warn me. The place does things to people, son. It's not a healthy apartment. It was my own mind screaming a warning at me in the voice of a dead man. I wasn't running from him. I was running from myself. I stumbled back from the counter, a strangled sob escaping my lips. My reality was a house of cards, and someone had just kicked out the table from under it. Was any of it real? The broken door? Or had I done that myself in a paranoid frenzy, just like the boy before me, tearing my own room apart, trying to get him out? "Whoa, easy there," Davies said, standing up quickly. He saw the look on my face. He knew. The old tenant," I stammered, my vision starting to swim. "Do you have a picture of him?" Davies's expression was full of pity. He knew what I was asking. He knew what I was about to see. He fumbled with his mouse, clicked a few times. An attachment on the file opened up. He turned the monitor toward the glass partition. "This is him," he said, his voice soft. "Mark Coleman, age 28. On the screen was a driver's license photo. A young man with tired eyes and a forced, unhappy smile. But it wasn't the face that made my heart stop. It was what he was wearing. A dark gray, nondescript hoodie. It was him. The shadow I saw on the security camera feed, lurking in the hallway. The blurred figure standing across the street, watching my window. The shape I had seen in my bedroom, the one I had thrown the ceramic vase at. I hadn't been fighting an intruder. I hadn't been fighting a ghost. I had been fighting a hallucination of the last person this apartment had driven insane. I was caught in a loop, a repetition of his horror, and I was just one step behind him on the path to a padded room. I was becoming the new ghost story for the next poor soul to rent apartment 1208. The world snapped back into focus under the harsh glare of fluorescent tubes. The smell of bleach and antiseptic filled my nose, a clean smell that should have been comforting. It wasn't. It was just sterile. A paramedic was checking my pupils with a small light. Officer Davies stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his face a mask of professional concern. The buzzing in my head had subsided to a low hum, the aftershock of a bomb going off in my reality. An answer, I kept thinking. The words looped in my mind. It's an answer. A clean, terrifying, but logical answer. The monster wasn't a phantom or a killer in a mask. It was a fungus, a microscopic poison I had been breathing for weeks. It explained everything. The headaches, the paranoia, the scratching in the walls, the face of Mark Coleman, the ghost of Mr. Henderson. They strapped me to a gurney. The Velcro was loud in the quiet of the late night. I didn't fight it. There was nothing left to fight. The fight was over. I had lost, but at least now I knew who my enemy was. It wasn't in the vents or behind the walls. It was in my blood, in my brain. The ambulance ride was a blur of streetlights streaking past the small back window. In the emergency room, they put an IV in my arm. The prick of the needle was a small, sharp dose of reality. A nurse with tired eyes asked me questions I could barely answer. My name, my date of birth. Did I know where I was? A hospital, I mumbled. I'm sick. My apartment made me sick. She nodded, scribbling on a clipboard. They left me in a curtained-off bay. The rhythmic, steady beep of the heart monitor next to the bed was the only sound. Beep, beep, beep. A mechanical lullaby. I was exhausted. Drained of fear, of adrenaline, of everything. For the first time in weeks, I felt a kind of release. It was over. I was out. I was safe. I closed my eyes, and the sound of the beeping machine pulled me down into the dark. The beeping of the heart monitor faded, replaced by a sound I knew too well. The low, electric hum of the old refrigerator in apartment 1208. My eyes opened. I wasn't in the hospital bed anymore. I was standing in the middle of my living room. The air was thick and heavy. The vase I had thrown was back on the end table, perfectly intact. The police tape on the broken door was gone. But there was no panic, no fear. My heart was calm, my breathing even. It was a dream, I understood that. A processing of the night's events. So I just watched. I watched my body move. It felt like I was a passenger. My legs carried me to the small entryway where my keys hung on a hook. My hand, steady and deliberate, lifted the key ring off the hook. It didn't jingle. It was a silent, fluid motion. I watched myself walk to the kitchen, open the refrigerator door, and place the keys inside the vegetable crisper right next to a wilting head of lettuce. The refrigerator light cast a pale, sick glow on my hand before I closed the door, plunging the kitchen back into shadow. Then I watched myself walk to my laptop, sitting open on the desk. My fingers, acting with a purpose that was not my own, flew across the keyboard. It wasn't the frantic typing of a scared man. It was calm, precise. A short, simple message appeared on the screen in a blank document. Backquote, I see you, backquote. My hand moved to the mouse. Click. Copy. I watched myself open my email, paste the text into a new message, and send it to my own address. Then I did it again, this time as a text message from a web service to my own phone number. I was watching myself build the cage, baiting my own trap. The threatening messages, the misplaced items, it was all here. It was me, a part of me I didn't know. The dream shifted. I was still in the apartment, but now I was standing in front of the large living room window, the one 12 stories up, the one with the handprint. My hand. I watched my body turn and walk to the balcony door. It wasn't locked. My hand slid it open, the wheels silent on the track. A cool night wind whipped into the room. It should have felt refreshing. Instead, it felt like a co-conspirator. Then came the part my conscious mind refused to believe was possible. I watched myself step out onto the small balcony. My hands gripped the railing. I was seeing this through my own eyes, but I couldn't stop it. I was a prisoner in my own skull. My body swung one leg over the railing, then the other. I was standing on the outside of the balcony, on the narrow concrete ledge, 12 floors above the hard city street. The wind tore at my clothes. My mind, the real me trapped inside, was screaming, a silent, frantic howl of pure terror. But my body was unnervingly calm. My fingers found a grip on the brickwork of the building. My feet, clad in sneakers, found impossibly small footholds in the facade. This wasn't the clumsy panic of a man losing his mind. It was the sure, steady movement of a practiced climber. It was an act of profound, physical insanity. Slowly, carefully, my body began to move sideways along the building's face, the scrape of denim on brick, the bite of the wind, the immense strain in my shoulders and fingertips. My goal was the living room window, just a few feet away. To leave a sign, to terrify the part of me that was still sane. I reached the window. My body pressed itself flat against the brick. With one hand clinging for life, the other, caked in mud from the planter on the balcony, reached out. I saw my own fingers, dark with dirt, splay out and press firmly against the cold glass. The handprint. My handprint. I'd put it there myself. Then, my index finger, still coated in grime, began to draw on the glass. Backward, so it could be read from the inside. Backquote. O-P-E-N-U-P backquote. The mold didn't just make me see things, it made me do things. It wasn't just poison, it was a pilot. It had a passenger seat in my skull, and sometimes it grabbed the wheel. The previous tenant, Mark Coleman, hadn't just gone crazy from hallucinations. The apartment had used his own body to terrorize him, just as it was now using mine. In the dream, my body finished its work. It carefully spidered its way back along the narrow ledge, back to the safety of the balcony. It swung its legs back over the railing and landed silently on the concrete floor. It slid the balcony door shut. Mission accomplished. It turned around, and it looked directly at me. At the me that was watching, horrified, from the inside. Its lips, my lips, twisted into a small, knowing smirk. It was a look of absolute control, of ownership. "You think he got away?" a voice said. It was my voice, but it was cold, empty. "You think a hospital can help you?" My other self took a step toward me. "I'm not in the walls. I'm not in the vents," it said, tapping a finger against its temple. My temple. "I'm in here. I am you." A war erupted inside my own head. A desperate, primal struggle for control. Two hands on one steering wheel, ripping it in opposite directions. The trapped part of me fought back with a surge of pure, unadulterated terror. I needed to wake up. I needed to get out. I clawed at the dream, at the fabric of this nightmare place, pulling and tearing and screaming a scream that had no sound. My other self just laughed, the sound echoing in the silent apartment. I ripped myself out of the darkness with a violent gasp. My eyes flew open. The hospital room. The white curtains. The steady, insistent beep of the heart monitor. I was soaked in sweat, my chest heaving. The curtain was pulled back. The nurse from before rushed in, her face etched with alarm. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You were screaming, making a terrible noise." I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You were scratching at yourself," she said, her eyes glancing down at my hands. "We were about to restrain you." My gaze followed hers. I slowly lifted my hands into the slice of light from the hallway. They were shaking, and under every single one of my fingernails there was a tiny, perfect crescent of dried, black dirt. The same dark, rich soil from the planter on my balcony. The doctor's words were a clean, white bandage over a septic wound. Severe mycotoxin exposure. Stachybotrys chartarum, most likely, nasty stuff. It can cause significant neurological symptoms, hallucinations, paranoia, memory issues. You're lucky you got out when you did, Mr. Hayes. I barely registered the name. He was a man with a kind face and a clipboard, a symbol of logic and science. He was the answer I had craved for weeks. My enemy had a name, a Latin one. It could be fought with chemicals in an IV bag. The things I did? I asked, my voice a dry rasp. The dream? The handprint. Entirely plausible, he said, nodding with an easy confidence that I desperately wanted to borrow. Your brain was under assault. Think of it like a very, very bad trip. You were suggestible, disoriented. You could have easily performed complex actions in a fugue state and retained no memory of them. The dirt under your nails? You were frantic. You probably clawed at 100 different things before the paramedics arrived. He was explaining away the monster. He was making it small, manageable. I clung to his words like a drowning man to a life raft. A fugue state, a bad trip, nothing more. They moved me from the chaos of the ER to a private room on the 4th floor. The door was heavy, solid wood, with a small, wired glass window. It latched with a satisfying, heavy thunk. A fortress. The nurse, a different one, a burly man named Carlos, showed me the call button. He was efficient, professional. He checked my IV, adjusted the drip. He didn't ask questions. He just did his job. The silence he left behind was a gift. I was alone. Finally, truly alone. The room was beige and blue. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor beside me. Beep, beep, beep. It wasn't a countdown to death anymore. It was the sound of my life. Proof that I was still here. I was out of apartment 1208. I was safe. I let my head fall back against the starchy pillow. The fear was a fever that had finally broken. My body was leaden, exhausted. My mind was quiet. For the first time, there were no whispers in the corners, no shadows playing tricks. There was just the beige room, the blue blanket, and the beat of my own heart. I was safe. Then I heard it. It cut through the rhythmic beeping. It was faint at first, easy to dismiss. HCK, HCK, HCK. A cough. From the room next door. It's a hospital, I told myself. People are sick. That's what they do here. They cough. I tried to ignore it. I focused on the beep. Beep, beep. HCK, HCK, HCK co. There it was again. A little stronger this time. It was a specific kind of cough. A dry, weak, rattling sound. The sound of lungs that were tired of trying. A cold thread of dread stitched itself down my spine. It was a familiar cough. It sounded exactly like my cough a month ago, when this all began. My own rationalization sounded stupid in my head. It's a hospital. But what were the odds? The exact same, peculiar timbre? No, it was a coincidence. It had to be. I squeezed my eyes shut. Go to sleep. It's the medicine. You're suggestible. HCK, HCK. This time it ended in a weak, defeated whimper. A sound of pure misery. My heart rate jumped. The monitor beside my bed picked it up immediately. The beeping quickened, an electronic tattletale. Beep, 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 beep. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't just lie here and listen, waiting. My body was heavy, protesting every movement. I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The plastic IV tube pulled taut. The metal pole it hung from swayed, its wheel scraping softly against the linoleum. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. I stood up, my hospital gown feeling thin and useless. I was a patient. I was sick. What was I doing? I half walked, half dragged the IV pole with me to the door. Every clink of the metal, every plastic squeak of the wheels was an accusation. You are not well. Get back in bed. But the coughing had started again, a quiet, persistent rhythm of decay. I reached the door and pressed my forehead against the cool, painted wood. My eyes lined up with the small, wire-meshed window. I peered through. The hallway was empty, lit by the ghostly, low-power nightlights. I could see the door to the adjacent room. Room 414. Mine was 412. I shifted my weight, trying to see inside her room through her own door's window. The angle was all wrong. I couldn't see a thing. Frustration, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. I fought the urge to pound on the door, to scream. I was a man in a cage, watching the cage next to mine. Then I saw a better way. Across the hall from her room, there was another room, its door wide open, empty, being cleaned or prepped. If I could just get to that doorway, I could look directly into her room. My hand was on the handle of my own door before I could think. It wasn't locked from the inside. I turned it slowly. The latch clicked, a sound like a gunshot. I froze, listening. Nothing, just the beeping from my room and the quiet, terrible coughing from hers. I pulled the door open just enough to slip out, dragging my IV pole with me. The hallway air was colder. The floor was hard under my bare feet. I felt exposed, insane. A man in a paper gown with a tube in his arm, stalking the halls of a hospital at 3 a.m. I crept across the hall, my own breathing loud in my ears. I reached the empty room and ducked inside, pressing my back against the wall just inside the doorway. From here, I had a perfect, unobstructed view into room 414, and my blood turned to ice. She was young, maybe 20, a college kid. She was sitting up in bed, knees hugged to her chest. Her face was pale, illuminated by the glow of her phone. Her eyes were wide, staring at the screen with a look of pure, animal terror I knew all too well. But it wasn't her phone that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the television. Mounted on the wall across from her bed was a large, flat-screen TV. It was on. The screen was showing an image of her. A live feed. It was filmed from a high corner of the room, looking down at her in the bed. Her own private hell, broadcast back at her in real time. The same trick. The same psychological warfare. What hospital puts a security camera in a patient's room and plays the feed on their TV? None. No hospital does that. So he was here. Or it was here. The pilot. The sickness. The thing from apartment 1208. It hadn't stayed behind. It had followed me. Or worse, it had spread. I stood there, paralyzed in the doorway of the empty room, a helpless spectator. I watched her whimper. I watched her type a frantic message into her phone, her thumbs a blur. Who was she texting? The police? Her parents? It didn't matter. I knew they wouldn't believe her. They'd say it was a prank. A system glitch. Or worse, they'd say it was the sickness talking. My mind raced. This isn't possible. The mold is in the apartment. It's geographically located. It can't be here. But what if it wasn't just the mold? What if the mold was just a doorway, an antenna? What if the thing it let in could travel? What if I was a carrier? What if I had brought it here, clinging to me like spiritual filth, and now it had leaked out and infected her? The thought was more terrifying than anything I had experienced. My own suffering was one thing, to be the cause of someone else's. Then, on the TV screen, in the corner of her room, something changed. A patch of shadow in the far corner, near the window, seemed to deepen, to coalesce. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew that shadow. I knew its shape. Slowly it pulled itself from the darkness. A tall, thin figure, featureless, wrapped in a dark hoodie that swallowed the light. My hallucination. My demon. It was in her room. I wanted to scream a warning. It's right there, in the corner. But I was frozen. My voice was a block of cement in my throat. I could only watch the TV screen. The girl didn't see it. She was still staring at her phone. Her world shrunk to that single glowing rectangle. But the figure wasn't looking at her. It stood perfectly still, its posture unnaturally rigid. It wasn't a predator stalking its prey. It was waiting. Then its arm, long and unnaturally thin, rose slowly. It didn't point at the girl. It pointed at the window behind her. Its finger was a white splinter against the dark glass. It just pointed. Out into the night. My eyes followed the direction of that pointing finger. Out the window of her room, across the dark expanse of the city, dotted with sleeping lights. I knew this skyline. I knew what was out there. My gaze found it without even trying. A tall, ugly concrete and glass tombstone rising into the sky. My apartment building. The breath I was holding escaped me in a ragged, silent gasp. A wave of understanding, so profound, so nauseating, it made me dizzy. My knees weakened, and I braced myself against the doorframe. It was the twist. The .. muck tu nam .. It was never about me. The ghost of Mark Coleman, the lingering consciousness on the walls, the entity born from the poison. It wasn't trying to drive me mad. It was trying to warn me. And when I wouldn't listen, it used my own hands to write the message. It used my own body to create the proof. Open up. Open your eyes. I see you. Not I see you, Alex, but I see you, the real threat. It was a desperate, garbled SOS from a man who already drowned, trying to tell the next swimmer about the riptide. And this thing, this entity, it wasn't haunting me now. It was using me as a vantage point. It was showing me, look, it's starting again, a new tenant, a new victim, The building has found someone else. I felt a strange, horrifying surge of pity. For Mark Coleman. For this poor girl. For myself. We were just batteries, used by the building to power its own sick cycle. On the screen, the figure held its pose, finger outstretched. A silent, accusatory monument. Then, it moved. Its head turned. Slowly. A deliberate, mechanical motion. It didn't turn toward the terrified girl in the bed. It turned toward the camera. Its face was a void inside the hoodie, a pit of absolute black. It looked directly into the lens, directly at me. Through the TV, through the hallway, through the two wired glass windows, our gazes locked across an impossible distance. It saw me. It knew I was watching. My heart stopped. The beeping of the monitor in my room flatlined in my memory. It slowly, deliberately shook its head, a single, side-to-side motion. No. The meaning was clear. You're wrong. Your grand realization? Your neat little theory? Wrong. Then, the creature slowly raised its other hand. The arm was rigid, the motion jerky. It brought its finger up, not pointing out the window anymore, not pointing at the girl. It pointed straight at the camera. It pointed straight at me. The message wasn't a warning for her anymore. It was a promise for me. The target isn't just her. You're not done. The world snapped back into focus with the sound of a scream. Mine. But it wasn't a scream that came out of my mouth. It was the high, piercing shriek of the heart monitor in my room, a flatline tone that sliced through the night. My legs moved before my brain did. I was out of the empty room, a ghost in a paper gown dragging his IV pole across the linoleum. The metal wheels skittered, the bag of fluid swayed. I didn't care who saw me. I fumbled back into room 412, slamming the door shut behind me just as the heavy footsteps of a nurse started pounding down the hall. My heart was a fist hammering against my ribs. I scrambled back into bed, the cold sheets a shock against my skin. The beeping hadn't flatlined, it was just fast. A frantic electronic pulse that mirrored my own. Carlos burst in. "Mr. Hayes, what's going on?" I couldn't speak. I could only point weakly at the monitor, my own personal liar. "Your heart rate spiked to 180. What happened?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room, my face. "Nightmare," I croaked. The lie tasted like ash. He looked at me for a long moment, his professional calm, doing nothing to soothe me. He checked my IV. He adjusted my blanket. He didn't believe me, but it wasn't his job to call me a liar. His job was to keep me alive. "Try to get some rest, Mr. Hayes. I'll be right outside." The door closed with a soft click. The lock did not engage. I knew it wouldn't. This wasn't a fortress. It was an observation cell. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, every tick of the clock, every hum of the building's ventilation, a new threat. The figure's face, a hole of pure black, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. It pointed at me. "You're not done." The next morning, the doctor came back. The same one with the kind face and the clipboard. He looked pleased. "Sleep well?" he asked. "No," I said. My voice was raw. "The girl. In room 414. She's in danger." He smiled, a tight professional smile. "There's no one in room 414, Mr. Hayes. It's being prepped for a new admission this afternoon." The floor dropped out from under me. "No. I saw her. She was on her phone. The TV was on, showing a camera feed of her own room. It's happening again. The thing from my apartment. It's here. It's..." He held up a hand, a gentle traffic cop halting my spiral into madness. "Alex," he said, using my first name for the first time. It felt like a weapon. "The stachybotrys, we talked about this. It can cause very vivid, very convincing hallucinations. You've been through a severe trauma. Your brain is trying to process it. It's normal to project your fears onto your surroundings." This wasn't a projection. It was real. I saw a figure in her room. He nodded, his pen already making a note on his clipboard. I knew what it said without seeing it. Patient continues to exhibit profound paranoia. Hallucinations persist. Adjust medication. He looked at me with that gaze, the one I was starting to hate more than any shadow. It was pity. "We're going to help you, Alex," he said. "We're going to get you through this." He was building a wall of reason around me, and on the other side of it I was alone, screaming. They wouldn't let me leave the room after that. The door was watched. My pleas were met with calm, patronizing nods. I was a specimen. A case study in mycotoxin-induced psychosis. I spent hours staring at the door to my room, waiting. For what, I didn't know. Around noon, there was a knock. Not a nurse's knock. It was a firm, two-tap beat. Confident. The door opened and a man in a suit that cost more than my car stepped inside. He was maybe 50, with perfect hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He carried a sleek leather briefcase. "Mr. Hayes? Alex Hayes?" he asked, extending a hand. I didn't take it. He wasn't bothered. He pulled the visitor's chair closer to my bed. "My name is Arthur Jennings. I'm an attorney representing the ownership group of the Northgate Tower." My blood ran cold. "I'm here because we were made aware of the unfortunate incident at your apartment," he said, his voice a smooth, polished stone. "The presence of Stachybotrys is a deeply regrettable oversight. Our clients, the owners, take the health and safety of their tenants very seriously." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers bound in a blue cover. He laid it on my bedside table, next to my half-eaten Jell-O. "They want to make this right," Jennings continued. "So they've authorized me to offer you a rather substantial settlement, to cover your medical bills, your relocation costs, pain and suffering. All of it. All we ask in return is your signature on a standard non-disclosure agreement. It's all in there. Just a formality to put this whole messy business behind us all." He leaned back, his work done. A problem solver. He was here to write a check and buy my silence. The whole thing felt dirty, calculated. It was his voice. Something about the cadence, the calm, measured tone that felt more like a performance than a real way of speaking. I closed my eyes, trying to place it. Where had I heard that voice before? He spoke again. "This is a very generous offer, son. I advise you to take it." Son. That condescending dip in his tone, and then I had it. A memory. Me, on the floor of my apartment, the smart speaker on the kitchen counter, a voice, robotic and synthesized. But underneath the digital distortion, there was a rhythm, a certain way of putting words together. "We know you are alone." I stripped the polish off of Arthur Jennings's voice. I took away the warmth. I layered on a cheap electronic filter. And there it was, the same voice, the same man. My breath hitched. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. The mold was real. The doctor was right about that. It was the perfect accelerant. It broke down my mind, made me sick, suggestible. It was the foundation. But someone had built on that foundation. Someone programmed the smart speaker. Someone hacked my TV. Someone sent that email about the old chair. The chair they must have known contained the worst of the spores, to make sure I opened it. Someone used my sickness against me, twisting it, aiming it, amplifying it from a quiet hum of paranoia into a screaming symphony of terror. It wasn't a ghost. It was gaslighting. A deliberate, high-tech, psychological attack. Why? To make me look crazy. To discredit me so that when I finally broke and ran, no one would believe my story about the mold. I wouldn't be a victim with a lawsuit. I'd be a nutcase with a history of hallucinations. It was cheaper than a hazmat team and a class action suit. It was brilliant. And it was evil, this man. Arthur Jennings. The building management. They were the purposeful intruders. They hadn't broken my door down. They'd broken my mind down. The walls of the hospital room seemed to vibrate. The beep of the monitor was a countdown clock. I wasn't safe. I had run from the haunted house right into the clutches of the people who built it. My anger flared, hot and clean, burning away the last of my fear. I wasn't their victim anymore. I saw my phone on the table, just past the legal documents. Proof. I needed proof. I let out a shuddering breath, a convincing performance of a man defeated. I sagged back against the pillows. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." Jennings smiled, that same plastic smile. A wise decision. I reached a trembling hand toward the papers, my eyes locked on his. With my other hand, hidden by the thin hospital blanket, I fumbled for the phone. My thumb found the side button, woke the screen. I slid my thumb up, unlocked it. I couldn't look down. I had to do it by feel. I swiped, trying to find the voice memo app. My finger tapped the icon. I felt the small haptic buzz of confirmation. I pressed the big, red, virtual button. I took the pen he offered. My hand shook, but now it was from adrenaline, not fear. Just one question first, I said, my voice cracking perfectly. Jennings's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. I looked him dead in the eye. The armchair. The email that said it was a gift from the previous tenant. Was that you? For 1 second, the mask slipped. The polished concern, the fake sympathy, it all vanished. I saw the thing underneath. It was cold and sharp and utterly without pity. A small, cruel smirk played on his lips. You're a smart kid, he said, his voice a low purr. But it's too late now. He had admitted it. I had him. The smug bastard, I had him on tape. He straightened his tie, the picture of corporate invincibility again. The documents are straightforward. My assistant will be by in an hour with the final signature pages. I suggest you have a good look at them. He stood, turned, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound of a closing cage. I waited. 1 breath. 2. Then I snatched the phone from under the blanket, my heart hammered with triumph. I hit the stop button on the screen and looked at the recording. My blood turned to ice. The timer read 0-100. The recording was empty. It hadn't worked. He was too far away. My phone was under a blanket. The mic was, no. Then I saw it. Below the blank recording, a new file had appeared in my list. A file I hadn't created. It was time-stamped right now. The file name was just a random string of numbers. The duration was 3 seconds. My hand was shaking for real now. What was this? Did he hack my phone? In the middle of the room? How was that possible? I tapped the file. I pressed play. I held the phone's speaker to my ear. It wasn't static. It wasn't empty air. It was his voice. Arthur Jennings' voice. Perfectly clear. No distortion. No distance. It sounded like he had leaned down and whispered directly into my phone's microphone. 3 seconds. 5 words. A promise and a threat. I know you're recording. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. The timer still read 0-100. Below it, the ghost file. The 3-second recording. I know you're recording. His voice. Not from across the room. It was inside the phone. Inside my ear. Impossible. How could he? My mind reeled. The door was closed. The room was quiet. But the cage was locked from the outside. I wasn't a patient. I was a prisoner. The doctor, the nurses, Jennings, they were the wardens. They weren't trying to help me. They were managing me. A problem to be contained until it could be erased. The anger from before was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. Fear. But it was a different kind of fear now. Not the panic of a hunted animal, but the focused dread of a soldier trapped behind enemy lines. I couldn't fight my way out. The doctor's pitying smile, the stack of legal papers, the voice on my phone. They had built a wall of crazy around me that was stronger than steel. If I screamed, they'd sedate me. If I fought, they'd restrain me. I had to be smarter. I had to play their game. I composed my face. I let my shoulders slump. I practiced the look of a defeated man in the reflective black screen of the TV. My eyes were wide. My mouth hung slightly open. Perfect. When the nurse came in with dinner an hour later, I was the model patient. I ate the mashed potatoes. I swallowed the pills she gave me without question. I asked her, my voice a weak rasp, if I could have some water. Of course, Mr. Hayes, she said, her smile practiced. She left the room, leaving the door ajar. Her footsteps receded down the hall toward the nurse's station. This was it. My window. It wouldn't be open for long. I slid out of bed. The IV pole in my hand was still there. I ripped the tape off, my skin raw. A bead of blood welled up. I ignored it. I tugged the needle out. The pain was a sharp sting, a welcome dose of reality. In the closet was the small bag with my clothes from the night I was admitted. jeans, a t-shirt, my beat-up sneakers. They smelled of sweat and mold. I pulled them on over the paper gown. Every rustle of fabric sounded like a gunshot. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat. I crept to the door. I peeked through the crack. The hallway was empty. The nurse was out of sight. Now or never. I moved. No running. Just a fast, determined walk. Head down. Don't make eye contact. I looked like a visitor leaving. I passed the nurse's station. No one looked up. I pressed the button for the elevator. The wait was the longest 10 seconds of my life. The ding of its arrival was deafening. I stepped inside. The doors slid shut. I was out. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow. I had no wallet, no keys. Just the phone in my pocket and a destination. I knew I couldn't go to the cops. What would I tell them? A lawyer for a powerful real estate group is gaslighting me with high-tech mind games that started with mold in my apartment? They would call the hospital and an ambulance would have me back in that room before I finished the sentence. No, if I wanted proof, I had to get it myself. I had to go back to the source. The Northgate Tower. The walk took almost an hour. My body ached. A dull throb pulsed behind my eyes. But with every step away from the hospital, my head felt clearer. The paranoia wasn't gone, but it was shifting. It was no longer a fog. It was a compass needle, pointing directly at them. The lobby of the Northgate Tower was dark, save for a single light over the security desk. A different guard was on duty, a drowsy-looking man watching a movie on a small tablet. The management office was on the mezzanine level, overlooking the lobby. I remembered the fire stairs. I'd used them once when the elevator was broken. The door was supposed to be alarmed. I circled the building. In the back, by the dumpsters, was the service entrance, a heavy steel door with a keypad lock. I looked at the keypad. 10 digits, worn with use. I remembered seeing a maintenance guy entering the code once. He was sloppy. He didn't shield the pad. I closed my eyes, picturing it. His thick fingers. The motion. It wasn't a number. It was a pattern. A Z shape. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9. My hand was shaking. This is stupid. It won't work. I punched in the code. A green light blinked. A soft click echoed in the alley. The lock disengaged. I slipped inside. The air was cool and still. I was in a concrete corridor that smelled of bleach. I found the stairs and climbed, my sneakers silent on the metal treads. 1 floor up. A door marked Management. It was locked. Of course it was. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight. I examined the lock. It was a standard commercial model. Above it, a small, square magnetic plate. An electronic lock, tied to the keypad downstairs. But these things had overrides. Physical ones. I ran my fingers along the doorframe. Near the top hinge, I felt it. A tiny hole, no bigger than the tip of a pen. An emergency keyhole. I had nothing. No tools, no wire. Wait, the paper gown. I reached into the back of my jeans and pulled it out. I tore a strip off, then twisted it. Tight. Tighter still. Until it was a stiff, thin cord of paper. I licked the end to make it harder. I slid it into the tiny hole. It was flimsy. Useless. Then I remembered the IV needle. I'd ripped it from my arm, but what did I do with it? I checked my pockets. Nothing. I looked down at the cuff of the paper gown still peeking out from my sleeve. There it was. The small plastic cannula caught in a fold. With trembling fingers, I worked it free. I inserted the thin plastic tube into the keyhole. I pushed. I felt a faint click. I twisted. Nothing. I jiggled it. I pushed further. There was a tiny spring-loaded button deep inside. I pressed, and I heard a soft thunk from the magnetic lock. I held my breath. I turned the handle. The door opened. The office was dark. The only light came from the blue and green blinking of a server rack in the corner. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. It was a landscape of gray cubicles and filing cabinets. I moved through them, my phone's light cutting a nervous path through the gloom. I was looking for Jennings's office. It had to be one of the ones along the back wall, with the glass window looking out. I found it. Arthur Jennings, senior counsel. The door was unlocked. His desk was immaculate. A monitor, a keyboard, a leather-bound blotter, nothing out of place. No papers. This wasn't where the work got done. The real files wouldn't be here. They'd be in a file room. I went back out into the main office. Against the far wall was a bank of tall, metal filing cabinets, the kind that locked with a single bar. This one was unlocked. I pulled open the first drawer. AC. I rifled through the tabs. Tenant leases. Tenant complaints. Tenant renewals. I went to the next drawer. DF, and the next. GI. And then I saw it. A tab that was different. It wasn't neatly printed. It was handwritten on a piece of yellow tape. Incident handling. My blood ran cold. I pulled the file. It was thick. I opened it. The top sheet was a form. Subject name, apartment number, identified vulnerability, resolution method. The first name was a woman I didn't know. Apartment 12B. Her identified vulnerability was listed as recent divorce, history of anxiety. The resolution method was auditory and olfactory stimuli, mimicry of ex-husband's presence. Subject vacated after 11 days. Apartment successfully rehabbed. I flipped the page. Another name, a young man in 8G, history of sleep paralysis. Resolution, targeted infrasound broadcast during REM cycles. Visual projection of shadow figures. Subject broke lease due to intense paranormal activity. What is this? My stomach turned. This wasn't just about the mold. This was a playbook, a system for scaring people out of their homes. People who might complain. People who might sue. People who were inconvenient. I kept flipping, page after page of names, of lives they had systematically dismantled. Then I saw my own name. Alex Hayes, apartment 10D. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. Identified vulnerability, urban isolation, pre-existing environmental sensitivity, Stachybotrys. My sickness wasn't an accident. It was a tool. They knew. Resolution method, tech-based gaslighting, smart device manipulation, A/V system hacking, introduction of contaminated object, armchair, to accelerate psychological decline. Goal, full psychotic break to discredit any potential claims. I felt like I was going to be sick. It was all there. A cold corporate strategy for destroying my sanity. And then I saw the last file in the folder. A new one. The tab was crisp. The name, Eliza Vance. Apartment 414. The girl. The girl from the hospital. No, not the hospital. The TV screen. But her apartment number was 414, the same as the empty room next to mine. My God, she wasn't in the hospital. She was in the building. This building. She was another target. Tucked in the back of the folder was a large, folded document. I pulled it out and spread it across a nearby desk. It was a blueprint, a detailed schematic of the entire Northgate Tower. But it wasn't just plumbing and electrical. It showed network cables, Wi-Fi access points. It showed how every smart thermostat, every smart TV, every speaker in every upgraded apartment was routed through a central server. Right here, in this office. There were handwritten notes in the margins, in Jennings' precise script. Notes on exploiting the building's systems. Use HVAC to circulate psychoactive aerosols. Override smart locks during peak stress events. Psychopower to induce disorientation. This was their armory. A high-tech torture chamber disguised as a luxury apartment building. I had to get this to the police. This was everything. This was the proof. A brilliant white light flooded the room. I froze, caught in the glare like an animal in headlights. The overhead fluorescence hummed to life, harsh and unforgiving. The door to the office clicked shut. Arthur Jennings stood there, his suit just as perfect as it was in the hospital. He wasn't smiling. Beside him stood a mountain of a man, the security guard, the one I always saw in the lobby during the day. The one who always gave me a curt nod. The one who was part of the scenery. He was the one. The strange shoe I'd found outside my door. It was his size. He was the one who could move through the building without suspicion. He placed the items. He was the hands. Jennings was the brain. It wasn't just one, it was a team. The guard took a step forward. His expression was flat, bored, like this was just another part of his shift. "You shouldn't have come back here," he said, his voice a low rumble. I backed away, my eyes darting around for an escape. There was none. My hand fumbled on the desk behind me, closing around something heavy. A glass paperweight. A pathetic weapon. The guard laughed. A short, ugly sound. He didn't reach for a weapon. He pulled out his phone. His thumb tapped the screen. In unison, every computer monitor in the office flickered to life. Not to a desktop. To a video feed. My breath hitched. It was a camera shot from above, looking down into a bedroom. A girl was sleeping. Her face was pale. An IV stand was next to her bed. It was the girl. The girl from my hallucination. Eliza Vance. Room 414. She wasn't a ghost. She was real. And she was here. In the building. Hooked up to God knows what. Jennings finally spoke, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "You see, Alex, we knew you'd be resourceful. We counted on it." He gestured to the monitors. To the sleeping girl. "You act," he said, a cruel, thin smile playing on his lips. "She pays the price." My hand tightened around the glass paperweight. It felt heavy, solid. A stupid, useless piece of glass against a man built like a concrete wall. The guard watched me, his face a mask of utter boredom. This wasn't a confrontation for him. It was just a job. Mopping up a spill. Jennings' voice hung in the air, a drop of poison in a sterile room. "You act. She pays the price." My eyes shot from the monitors to him. The rage was a hot spike in my chest. I wanted to launch myself across the desk. I wanted to smash that perfect, condescending face with the paperweight. I wanted to scream, but the screens held me hostage. Eliza Vance. Sleeping under the influence of whatever they were pumping into her veins through that IV. One move from me, and what would they do? Turn up the drip? Fill her room with the same spores that turned my brain inside out? My imagination, supercharged by my own recent hell, supplied 100 different answers. None of them were good. The guard took a half step forward. A low rumble started in his chest. "That's enough, Robert," Jennings said without looking at him. His voice was calm, controlled. He slid his gaze back to me. "Leave us." The guard, Robert, actually looked surprised for a second. He glanced at me, at the paperweight in my hand, then back at Jennings. A silent question. Jennings gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The guard grunted. He turned and walked to the office door, opened it, and stepped out, pulling it shut with a firm click. The lock engaged. Just me and him. The room felt bigger now. Quieter. The hum from the server rack was the only sound. Why would he do that? Why would he leave himself alone with me? I was cornered. Desperate. I still had the paperweight. "Put it down, Alex," Jennings said. It wasn't a command. It was a suggestion from a therapist. "You're not going to use it. That's not who you are." My hand trembled. He was right. God damn him, he was right. My fingers uncurled. The paperweight settled back onto the desk with a soft thud. "Good," he said. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down. Let's talk." "Sit down." A hot laugh almost escaped my lips. I didn't move. Jennings sighed, a sound of mild disappointment, as if I were a student who had failed to grasp a simple concept. "We're not the building management, Alex. I think you figured that much out. Northgate Property Group is a shell. A very convincing, very profitable one, but a shell nonetheless." He walked around his desk and sat in his expensive leather chair. He folded his hands on the blotter. He looked like he was about to start a performance review. My mind was a scramble of wires, shorting out. "What are you?" I managed to get out, my voice thin. "We are a research firm," he said, his voice level. "We specialize in applied psychology, stress testing, Environmental influence on human behavior. This building is our laboratory. A laboratory. The word landed with a physical weight. The blueprint on the desk. The network cables. The HVAC overrides. It wasn't an armory. It was a set of surgical instruments. The subjects? I asked, already knowing the answer. The tenants, of course, he said, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Carefully selected. We study their breaking points. We introduce catalysts. We observe. We document. He nodded towards the folder with my name on it. Your file is a work of art, by the way. A masterpiece of induced paranoia. The sickness washed over me again. It wasn't just about forcing people out. It was never about the real estate. That was just the cover story. The why. The real work was the how. They were scientists of fear. The mold. A catalyst, he confirmed. One of our more organic approaches. Stachybotrys, specifically a strain we've engineered to heighten anxiety and suggestibility. For you, it worked splendidly. It opened the door. Your mind did the rest of the work. We just gave it a little push. He gestured around the room. A hacked smart speaker here, a fake text message there, an impersonated voice. Simple tricks, really. Child's play for our tech team. But to a mind already primed for suspicion? Devastating. I stared at him. The man who had orchestrated the systematic destruction of my sanity was explaining his methodology to me like a college professor. There was no malice in his voice. Only a detached academic passion. That was the most terrifying part. This wasn't personal. It was data. I was a data point. You're the best we've ever had, Jennings continued, leaning forward. His voice dropped, becoming more intimate. Most subjects break. They flee. They crumble. They call the cops and get laughed out of the station. They check themselves into hospitals. They make for predictable results. He paused. But you didn't break. You bent. You adapted. You got smarter. You escaped a locked ward. You figured out the service entrance code. You bypassed a magnetic lock with an IV cannula. You found this office. You found the truth. A cold dread seeped into my bones, far colder than the fear of the guard. I was starting to understand. This wasn't the end of the line. This was all a test, I whispered. Jennings' thin smile returned. It was a smile of validation. Phase 1 of the test, yes, and you passed with the highest score on record. He reached under his desk and placed a sleek, black tablet on the blotter. He slid it across the polished wood. It stopped a few inches from my hand. Your final exam, Alex. I looked down at the tablet. The screen was dark. I didn't touch it. I looked at the monitors, at the still, pale face of Eliza Vance. The girl in 414, Jennings said, following my gaze. Eliza. She's a new subject. Lower tier. More fragile than you. We started her on a simple protocol. Auditory hallucinations. The sound of weeping from inside her walls. She's scheduled for a technology-based escalation tomorrow night, a full system takeover of her apartment. He tapped the tablet. It glowed to life. The interface was brutally simple. A live video feed of Eliza's room took up the top half of the screen. Below it were two large virtual buttons. One was green. It said, Release. The other was red. It said, Amplify. My blood ran cold. My throat was sand. The choice is yours, Jennings said, his voice a soft caress of temptation. Press release. The IV will administer a harmless sedative. The system will reset. All stimuli in her apartment will cease. She'll wake up in the morning thinking she had a bad dream. We'll wipe her file. The experiment on her ends. You and she can both walk out of here. We'll even pay for your relocation and sign a very generous NDA. It sounded too good to be true. A way out. Freedom. For me and for her. But I knew there was a catch. I looked at the red button. Amplify. Or, Jennings said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, you can see what it's like from this side of the glass. He tapped a finger next to the red button. A series of submenus appeared. Auditory, visual, olfactory, technologic. Each one had sliders and toggles. Parameter, shadow figure. Frequency, random. Intensity, 75%. Stimulus, whispering. Source, smart speaker, left channel. It was a control panel for a human soul. I stared at the screen, mesmerized and horrified. I could do to her what they had done to me. I could play God. "The world is made of two types of people, Alex," Jennings said. "Sheep and shepherds. Victims and survivors. You spent the last few weeks as a victim, and you hated it. You fought back with everything you had. But what if fighting back isn't about escaping the game? What if it's about changing your role in it?" My heart hammered in my chest. This was the true trap. He wasn't offering me a choice between good and evil. He was offering me a choice between being the mouse or becoming the cat. I looked at the screen. At Eliza. She stirred in her sleep, a slight frown on her face. Maybe she was already dreaming. Maybe the weeping had already started in the back of her mind. A part of me, a dark, venomous part that had been born in the isolation of apartment 10D, felt a pull, a flicker of ugly curiosity. I knew her terror. I knew what it felt like to have your own mind turn on you. I knew exactly which buttons to push, not just on the tablet. In her head, I could make her feel the exact same dread, the same frantic loss of control. I could orchestrate her nightmare with the precision of a master composer, because I had already lived through the symphony. The thought made me sick. And it thrilled me. The power, the control, to be the one pulling the strings, to never be the puppet again. I looked up at Jennings. He was watching me, his eyes alight with clinical interest. He was a scientist observing his prize specimen as it contemplated a new, complex stimulus. My hand moved, shaking, towards the tablet. My finger hovered over the screen. I saw my own reflection in the black glass, the wild eyes, the pale, drawn face. A stranger, a monster they had created. I looked back at the live feed. Eliza's hand was clenching and unclenching on the bedsheet. She was trapped, a lab rat in a cage she didn't even know existed. Just like me. I closed my eyes. The face of the nurse from the hospital flashed in my mind. The doctor's pitying smile. Robert, the guard's bored expression. Jennings' smug satisfaction. They were the shepherds. And they were inviting me to join the flock. My finger came down. But I didn't press release. And I didn't press amplify. I tapped the empty space at the bottom of the screen, pulling up a hidden keyboard function. My fingers moved quickly, typing a short command string. A line of text appeared, cued to display on her smart TV. A message in a bottle. I looked at Jennings. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by confusion, then by dawning realization. I hit the green button. Release. Simultaneously, I swiped my other finger across a command line I had entered, a simple script I'd spotted in the system files displayed on the blueprints. /shutdown -h now/net. On the tablet screen inside Eliza's room, her television flickered on for just a second, long enough for a single line of white text to burn itself onto the screen against a black background. Don't trust anyone. Then, everything went dead. The video feed on the tablet vanished. The server rack in the corner let out a dying whine, its blinking blue and green lights winking out one by one. The main overhead lights in the office shut off, plunging us into the gloom, lit only by the emergency exit signs. The entire system crashed. I had freed her, and I had given her the one thing they never gave me. A warning. Silence. A profound, heavy silence. I stared at Jennings in the dim red light, my chest heaving. It was over. I had wrecked his lab. I won. Then I heard a sound. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Clap, clap, clap. Jennings was applauding. He rose slowly from his chair, a genuine, broad smile spreading across his face. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. Bravo, he said, his voice resonating with pure, unadulterated delight. Oh, bravo, Alex. I just stared, my mind unable to process what was happening. You didn't just choose an option, you created a new one, he said, taking a step toward me. You weaponized the system against itself to not only free the subject, but to inoculate her. You prioritized not just her safety, but her awareness. That is a level of strategic thinking we've never seen before. He stopped a few feet away from me, his eyes gleaming in the dark. The test wasn't about choosing to be a victim or an aggressor. It was about seeing if you could transcend the choice entirely, to see if you could become a designer. He extended his hand. Congratulations, Alex. You've passed. Welcome to the team. The hand he offered me hung in the red emergency light between us, It was a clean hand, manicured. Not the hand of a monster, but a CEO. The word team echoed in the dead air. It was an invitation, an absolution, an obscenity. My mind was a car crash, all twisted metal and screaming alarms. I didn't take his hand? I couldn't move. My legs were stone. Jennings' smile didn't falter. He simply withdrew his hand, as if my rejection was just another data point. "Robert," he called out, his voice calm. The office door clicked and swung open. The big guard stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Jennings, waiting for an order. "Escort Mr. Reed to the residential suite." "B-wing," Jennings said. "Full privileges," Robert grunted. The sound was the same, but the context was different. It wasn't a threat now, it was a task. He gestured for me to go first. I looked from him to Jennings. What choice did I have? I walked past the guard, my body numb. My victory a moment ago felt like a lifetime away. It was a joke, a punchline they had all been waiting for. The hallway was not the grimy service corridor I had used to get in. It was clean, white walls, recessed lighting. It smelled of citrus and fresh paint. We walked to an elevator I didn't know existed. Robert swiped a black key card. The door slid open with a soft chime. Inside, the walls were polished steel. I saw my reflection, a pale, haggard ghost in dirty clothes. Robert pressed the button for the top floor. The door opened into a different world. It wasn't an apartment, it was a hotel suite. A plush gray carpet swallowed the sound of our footsteps. A king-sized bed with a crisp white duvet sat in the center of the main room. A floor-to-ceiling window looked out over the city lights, a glittering tapestry of lives I no longer belonged to. On a small table, a set of folded clothes sat waiting. A simple gray shirt, black pants. Next to them was a covered silver tray. "Your new residence, Mr. Reed," Robert said. His voice was flat. He wasn't my enemy anymore. He was my concierge. "Shower is through there. Food is on the table. Someone will be in touch tomorrow morning." He didn't wait for a response. He turned, walked back into the elevator, and the doors slid shut. The silence that followed was complete. I stood there for a long time. I didn't touch the clothes. I didn't lift the lid on the tray. I walked to the window. The city sprawled below, indifferent. Cars flowed like blood cells through concrete arteries. Each light was a home, a life, a place where people felt safe. I reached out and pressed my palm against the cold glass. I had won nothing. I had just graduated. The shower was scalding hot. I scrubbed my skin until it was red, trying to wash off the mold, the dust, the hospital smell, the feeling of Jennings' clinical gaze. It didn't work. When I stepped out, I put on the new clothes. They fit perfectly. Of course they did. I lifted the lid from the tray. Steak, asparagus, roasted potatoes. I hadn't eaten a real meal in weeks. I took a bite. It tasted like ash. I pushed the plate away. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for a sound that never came. Morning arrived without a sunrise, just a slow brightening of the room. The door opened with a soft electronic click. It wasn't Robert. It was a man I recognized instantly. My blood ran cold. He was the previous tenant of 10D, the one the building manager had told me about, the one who supposedly went crazy, screaming about voices in the walls, scrawling nonsense on the floor. He wasn't crazy. He was standing in my doorway, wearing a crisp, dark blue suit. He looked older, tired, lines etched around his eyes that weren't there in the old tenant photos I'd seen online. But he was sane. He was a supervisor. He gave me a thin, weary smile. He walked into the room and extended a hand, the same way Jennings had. "Miller," he said, "I was in charge of your file. Impressive work." I didn't take his hand either. My throat was dry. He sighed, letting his hand drop. "I get it." Took me a week before I shook anyone's hand. "Look, they sent me because I've been where you are. I was an architect. I designed high-rises. They put me in 10D, primed me with low-frequency sounds, made me think the building was structurally unsound, my own creation turning against me. It was—" He shook his head. "Elegant." He walked over to the window, looking down at the same city I had. "I did what you did. I fought back. I found the control room. They gave me the same choice. A family in Unit 7B. I chose release. They told me I'd passed too. He turned to face me, and his eyes were hollow. "This is the reward, Alex. You get to be a shepherd. Come on, Jennings is waiting." I followed him. What else could I do? We went back to the elevator, down to a different floor. It was an open-plan office. Clean, quiet, efficient. A dozen people, men and women of all ages, sat at identical white desks, staring at monitors. They were the colleagues Robert had mentioned. They glanced up as we entered, their faces curious, analytical. They weren't looking at a person. They were looking at a new variable. Jennings was in a glass-walled conference room at the far end. He beckoned us in. The room contained a single large table with a built-in screen, currently dark. Miller stood by the door. Jennings gestured for me to sit. "Sleep well?" Jennings asked. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I just stared at him. "Good," he said. "Time to get to work. Your first assignment, a new acquisition. Apartment 8G. He tapped the table. The screen flickered to life. It showed multiple camera angles of an apartment. My stomach twisted. It was a home invasion, but the invaders were us. Camera 1 showed a young couple. A man and a woman, probably in their late 20s. They were laughing. The man was on a small stepladder, trying to hang a framed picture. The woman was directing him. A little to the left, they were happy, unaware. They were lambs in the slaughterhouse, happily decorating their pen. This was a nightmare. I was on the other side of the glass now. "Mark and Sarah Lang," Jennings said, pulling up a file on a tablet. "Just moved in from Ohio. No family in the state. He's a graphic designer. She's a freelance writer." He slid the tablet to me. It showed their social media profiles, medical histories, credit scores, everything. A standard infiltration and isolation protocol. Our goal is to create a rift between them. Make one believe the other is the source of the distress. He pointed to a specific note in the wife's file. Phobias, arachnophobia, moderate to severe. Reported by an ex-boyfriend in a social media deep dive. "A simple catalyst to begin," Jennings said, his voice smooth as silk. "Your task, Alex, is to introduce the stimulus. You have full control of the apartment's tech suite. Lights, sound, smart devices. You can be subtle. You can be direct. The choice is yours." He brought up a new interface on the main screen. It was a control panel. Simple. Clean. Terrifying. There were buttons and sliders. Visuals. Audio. Haptics. Under audio, I saw options. Scuttling_legs.wave. Web_tearing.mp3. Under visuals, a more direct option. Display_arachnid_image_04.jpg with a drop-down menu for the target device. Living_room_TV. Bedroom_smart_display. Her_phone_screen. My finger hovered over the tablet. I could do it. I could press a button and a giant spider would flash onto their TV. I could make the smart speakers emit the sound of 1,000 tiny legs crawling just behind her ear. I knew what that would feel like. The sudden shock, the frantic searching, the growing dread, the look she would give her husband when he said he didn't see or hear anything, the first seed of doubt, the first crack in the foundation of their reality. I was being handed the hammer. "The world is made of two types of people, Alex." Jennings' voice was a low hum beside me. "The ones who watch the screens, and the ones who are on them. You've earned your seat at this table. Show us why." My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My hand was shaking. This was the real test. Not the one in the office, this one. Could I become them? Could I inflict the same terror that almost broke me? A dark part of me, the part that had been forged in the lonely darkness of 10D, felt a cold surge of power. The power to never be the victim again. I looked at the screen. At Mark and Sarah. He had gotten the picture hung. He got off the ladder, and she kissed him. A small, happy, perfect moment. A moment they would never get back if I pressed that button. I looked at Jennings. At Miller. who was watching me from the doorway with those dead eyes. He knew this choice. He had made his. My finger moved. I ignored the preset buttons. I brought up a command line interface the same way I had for Eliza. My fingers flew across the virtual keyboard. It wasn't a script to shut down the system. That wouldn't work twice. It was something simpler. A direct message. I typed out a short string of text. I looked at Miller. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of approval. It was a nod of resignation, of pity. I hit enter. On the main screen, in apartment 8G, the couple's brand new smart TV flickered. They both turned to look at it. Instead of a picture of a spider, a simple black and white notepad file opened, filling the screen. The text was stark. The black mold in the walls is toxic. It causes hallucinations. Get out. Check the vent behind the sofa. I had done it. I had given them a weapon. A physical, undeniable truth they could find. A way to fight back. I had chosen my side. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Miller. His grip was firm. "I knew you'd do that," he whispered, his voice laced with a profound sadness. "That's what I did my first time, too." I looked from him to Jennings. Jennings wasn't angry. He was just disappointed. He shook his head slowly, like a teacher marking an exam paper. "It's a shame," Jennings said, standing up. "Another failure." He looked at Miller. "The failsafe is the same as yours was. You remember." Miller's grip tightened on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said. "It's also a test, and you just failed." What? What did he mean? My head swam. A test within a test? Rah! The heavy glass door to the conference room slid shut with a solid thump. A magnetic lock clicked into place with a loud, final sound. I spun around, my heart seizing in my chest. Miller was gone. He had stepped out just before the door closed. It was just me and Jennings. No, it was just me. Jennings was already walking out of a second door on the other side of the room, one I hadn't even noticed. He didn't look back. I was alone, trapped in a glass box. Then I heard it, a faint sound, a low, steady hiss. It was coming from a small, circular vent in the ceiling. My eyes shot wide. I ran to the door, slamming my fists against the thick glass. It didn't budge. It didn't even vibrate. The hissing got louder. A strange, sweet smell filled the air. Gas. The gas had no taste. It just smelled sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun. Then, nothing. I woke up because my alarm was screaming. A harsh, digital shriek that drilled into my skull. My head pounded in time with the beeps. A hangover. A bad one. Had I been drinking? I couldn't remember. I slammed my hand down on the snooze button. The silence that followed was a blessing. I lay there, staring at the familiar cracks in the ceiling of my apartment. Apartment 10D. Home sweet home. The air was thick with the usual smells of stale coffee and dust. I dragged myself out of bed. My reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror showed a guy who needed a shave and about 10 more hours of sleep. Just another Tuesday. I stumbled into the small living area that doubled as my office. The window looked out onto the familiar brick wall of the building next door. I had to get to work. Bills to pay. Deadlines to meet. I was a freelance data entry clerk. It was as boring as it sounds. I sat down at my desk. The old office chair let out a long, painful groan. The hydraulic lift was shot, so it sank a few inches every time I sat on it. The pleather on the armrests was cracked and peeling. God, I hate this chair, I muttered to the empty room. My back ached just thinking about sitting in it for 8 hours. I leaned back, and the whole thing wobbled precariously. One of these days it was just going to collapse and dump me on the floor. I made a mental note to browse for a new one during my lunch break. Maybe one of those ergonomic mesh ones. The kind real professionals use. A guy could dream. I fired up the old desktop. It whirred to life with the sound of a small jet engine. While it was loading, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Everything in this place creaked. It was an old building. I spooned coffee grounds into the filter, filled the machine with water, and hit the brew button. The gurgling sound was the start of my daily ritual. Nothing felt out of place. Nothing felt wrong. It was just life. My head still throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes. I really must have tied one on last night. Strange. I couldn't remember a thing about it. Not a single detail. Just a black, empty void after what? I couldn't even remember what I did after work yesterday. The coffee machine sputtered its last, and I poured the black liquid into my favorite chipped mug. Back at the desk, my computer had finally decided to join the land of the living. I opened my browser. My homepage was a generic news site. I typed in the URL for my work portal, my fingers moving on autopilot. Log in, view assignments, download spreadsheet, start typing. Numbers and letters. Letters and numbers. My world shrunk to the size of the glowing rectangle in front of me. The work was mind-numbing. Column A, column B, match, verify, enter. Time bled together. The only sounds were the clicking of my keyboard and the hum of the computer's fan. My back was already starting to complain. I shifted in the chair, and it let out another pathetic squeal. Seriously, I needed a new one, something with lumbar support. Something that didn't feel like it was actively trying to cripple me. I finished a block of data and decided to take a 5-minute break. I opened a new tab, intending to check the sports scores. But something was already there. A banner ad at the top of the page. It was for a sleek, black, ergonomic office chair. Mesh back. Adjustable armrests. Lumbar support. It was the exact model I had pictured in my head just an hour ago. I stared at it. Creepy, I mumbled. Phone's always listening. It was a common complaint, a running joke in this day and age. Your devices spied on you to sell you shit. Everyone knew it. It was just the price of admission. I shrugged it off. A little unsettling, sure, but hardly a conspiracy. I went to close the ad. But my hand stopped. A cold feeling, thin and sharp as a needle, pricked the base of my skull. It wasn't the ad itself. It was the feeling it triggered. A powerful, overwhelming sense of déjà vu. I'd seen something like this before. Not an ad for a chair. Something else. Something targeted. Something. Knowing. My heart gave a funny little kick inside my chest. What was it? I tried to grab the memory, but it was like trying to catch smoke. A flash of something. A big screen. A man and a woman in a stark, clean apartment. They were laughing. Then the screen changed. A picture of a spider? No, that wasn't it. It was text. Simple black text on a white background. My head throbbed. Harder this time. Don't trust your eyes. The thought wasn't a thought. It was a whisper. An echo from a place I couldn't name. It wasn't my own voice. It felt like a warning I had given myself a long, long time ago. I pushed away from the desk. The chair screamed in protest. I stood up and walked around the small apartment. The feeling of unease was growing, turning from a pinprick into a cold, heavy weight in my gut. This wasn't a hangover. This was something else. What happened last night? The gap in my memory was a gaping hole, and a terrible fear was starting to seep out of it. I checked the front door. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was on. I hadn't left it like that. I never used the chain. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, lit by the single flickering fluorescent bulb. Everything looked normal, too normal. My gaze fell on my phone, sitting on the small table by the door. I picked it up. The screen was dark. I pressed the power button. It lit up. No new calls, a few junk text messages, and one new email. My blood ran cold. I didn't recognize the sender's address. It was a jumble of letters and numbers. sys.admin.protocol.4b@terminus.sec. It looked like spam. It should have gone to my junk folder. But it hadn't. The subject line was just 4 words. Welcome back, Subject 4B. Subject 4B? What kind of name was that? A shiver traced its way down my spine. My hand was shaking. This was wrong. This was all wrong. I should delete it. I should throw the phone against the wall, run out the door, and never look back. But I couldn't. I had to know. My thumb hovered over the email, then tapped. The message opened. There was no text in the body, just a single attachment. An audio file, _debriefing, _session, _failure.mp3, . Failure? My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My breath caught in my throat. I was suddenly aware of how quiet the apartment was. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the sound of my own ragged breathing. I pressed play. There was a hiss of static first. Then, a voice. My voice. No, please. It was thick with a panic I didn't recognize but felt in my bones. It was the sound of pure terror. Then, another sound. A heavy thump, and another. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of fists hitting something solid, something that wouldn't give. Let me out! Let me out! My voice was raw, shredded, a scream of desperation. I could hear the lack of air, the frantic gasping between shouts. He's lying! It's a test. Can't you see? Miller, help me. It's all a lie. Miller. The name hit me like a physical blow. A face flashed in my mind. A man in a suit with tired, hollow eyes. A weary smile. I've been where you are. The glass room. Jennings. The control panel. The message to Mark and Sarah. The sweet smell. It all came crashing back. Not as a memory, but as a tidal wave of remembered terror. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hangover. It was real. I had fought. I had tried to do the right thing, and I had failed. They had caught me, gassed me, and put me right back where I started. Wipe my memory and reset the board. The recording continued. My on-screen counterpart was sobbing now, a choked, broken sound. The sound of a man who knew he was trapped. The sound of hope dying. It's just another test, a new voice said. Smooth, calm, clinical. Jennings. His voice was distant, filtered through an intercom. And you just failed. The audio file ended. The apartment was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of them, watching me, listening. They hadn't just put me back in the cage. They had left the door to the previous cage open in my mind. They wanted me to remember. They wanted me to know that escape was an illusion, that every dawn was a reset, every choice was a test I was designed to fail. The loop wasn't the trap. The trap was knowing you were in the loop. My phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I stared at the dark screen, at my own reflection superimposed over the email, the terrified face of Subject 4B. The horror wasn't starting. It was starting again. And this time, I knew there was no way out.